Chapter 761. He still doesn't want to eat? A middle-aged man with black hair mixed with half of his white hair asked a woman beside him who was holding a plate of steaming hot rice. Sigh. The woman shook her head. Child's father, I think it's better to call the doctor over again and let them give the little horse another nutrient injection. Otherwise, the child's body won't be able to take it. The doctor already said that it's not good to give too many nutrient injections. If the child's stomach function deteriorates, it will be even more troublesome. The middle-aged man took the plate of food from the woman's hands and cursed. F***. I'll personally deliver it to him. If he doesn't eat, I'll break his legs. Dad, you're wrong. Big brother isn't even afraid of death right now. Why would he be afraid of you breaking his legs? An 11 or 12-year-old little girl beside the man happily said heartlessly. She didn't seem to feel the pain of her big brother who was on a hunger strike. Ding dong. At this time, the doorbell rang. The mother hurriedly went to the door and opened the video surveillance on the door. She saw a young man standing at the door of their house. Who is it? Why did he come here so early in the morning? The middle-aged man said with some dissatisfaction. It wasn't even 8 a.m. yet. What kind of guest would choose this time to come and visit? It's Little Han. Little Han is here. The mother looked at the surveillance and said with a pleasant surprise, You're saying that Guhan is here. The man's expression was also happy. I heard that he went to Yanjing City to participate in some competition. Why would he suddenly come to our house? All right, Dad. Hurry up and open the door. As long as Big Brother Guhan is here, stupid brother will eat. The little girl said excitedly. She was especially excited about Guhan's arrival. That's right. The person standing at the door of this house was Guhan. I believe that everyone has already guessed that this house wasn't someone else. It was the house of Guhan's childhood sweetheart, Song Hama. Song Hama's house was the only place where Guhan could receive the warmth of a family. Therefore, the relationship between Guhan and Song Hama's family was especially good. Papa Song, Mama Song, sorry to disturb you so early. As soon as the door opened, Guhan said to Song Hama's family with a smile. This kind of smile that was as warm as the spring breeze, this kind of smile with the warmth of family, was a smile that Guhan would rarely show even in front of his sword ladies. Child, what do you mean by disturbing? This is your home. Why are you treating me like an outsider? Mama Song intimately pulled Guhan in her embrace and pinched Guhan's face, waist, buttocks, and hands. Then she nodded with satisfaction. Your flesh is still there. It seems that you've taken good care of yourself these days. I'm relieved. Little Han, didn't I remember you participating in the 8 Academies assembly? Could it be that the competition was already over? Calculating the time, it doesn't seem right. Compared to Mother Song's intimacy, Papa Song was a lot colder. However, the concern he had for Guhan couldn't be concealed from his words. The competition hasn't started yet. I discovered something at the last minute and rushed back from Yanjing City. The first thing I did was to look for Papa Song and Mama Song. Guhan spoke 30% of the truth and 70% of the lies. Did you say that you came back alone? Papa Song was taken aback. Then he said in a reproachful tone, It must have been a dangerous journey. How could you go out alone? You should be moving with everyone. Smelly old man, what do you know? Mama Song rolled her eyes at Papa Song. Little Han is already a famous swordsman and the master of our Yuzhong City's sword pavilion. This means that our little Han is one of the best in Yuzhong City. What's the big deal about going back and forth by himself? Perhaps he can even bring us to Yanjing City to take a look. All right, if I bring you there, who knows how much trouble you'll cause for little Han? Papa Song sneered. Then he looked at Guhan and said, Little Han, you didn't rush here just to take a look at us, right? Why did you come looking for us? Papa Song, how is Toad now? Is he any better? Guhan worriedly looked at Song Hama's room. How else could he be? He's still the same as the day you came to see him. No matter what I say, he still refuses to eat and wants to starve himself to death. Little Han, you came at the right time. Quickly help me persuade Toad. Our whole family is suffering because of him. It's better not to be a swordsman anymore. Our lives won't be as good as before. Papa Song said in a sorrowful tone. After the trial ended, Guhan came to Song Hama's house many times. At first, Song Hama didn't even want to see Gohan. Later, he couldn't stand it anymore, and Gohan barged into his room. Only after Song Hama tried everything he could to convince him to eat 1 or 2 meals, but those are the only 2 meals that Song Hama ate. After Gohan left Yinjing City, Song Hama once again went on a hunger strike. Even now, he still had to rely on the doctor to forcefully inject him with nutrients to save his life. It's all right. Actually, I came this time because of Toad. Toad's heart disease needs medicine to be cured. This time, I brought the medicine with me. After saying this much, Gohan pulled someone in from the door. It was the unconscious Zhao Hao. Little Han, who is this? Papa Song was startled and asked in fear. This is the medicine I was talking about. Gohan replied with a smile. However, this made Papa Song even more afraid. Little Han, have you been bewitched? This is a human. How can it be used as medicine? You must have practiced too much and become muddle-headed. Papa Song's words almost made Gohan vomit blood. What era was this? How could there be such a thing as using a human as medicine? I'm saying that this person has a way to cure Toad's heart disease. Gohan's sword chi touched Zhao Hao's acupoint, and the unconscious Zhao Hao slowly woke up. Is this person a psychiatrist? Papa Song asked out of curiosity. What psychiatrist? I'm a master sword forging master. After hearing Papa Song's words, the drowsy Zhao Hao immediately stood up and refuted. In this life, he hated doctors the most. He absolutely couldn't be confused with doctors. Master sword forging master? How can he cure Toad's heart disease? Papa Song was even more confused. Papa Song, Toad is on a hunger strike because the Cloud Cast Iron is broken. If the Cloud Cast Iron can be repaired, the Toad will definitely return to normal. Papa Song suddenly realized that Gohan was planning to cure Song Hama's heart disease from the root. Papa Song, let's not talk anymore. I'll immediately bring Grandmaster Tianri to look for Toad. After saying this much, Gohan pulled the confused Zhao Hao to the door of Song Hama's room. After pushing the door, he discovered that it was still locked. I'll go get the key. Just as Papa Song was about to get the key to Song Hama's room, Gohan inserted his sword chi into the keyhole, and the lock opened. It was even more convenient than using the key. Thank the heavens. It's really good that Toad had a childhood friend like Little Cold. After seeing Gohan anxiously bringing Zhao Hao into Song Hama's room, Mama Song finally revealed a smile after so many days. What are you talking about? What do you mean childhood friends? How can you use childhood friends to describe a relationship between 2 men? Papa Song said discontentedly. TSK, what do you know? Childhood friends aren't even as close as our Toad and Little Cold. Why can't I use childhood friends? After entering Song Hama's room, the originally tall, big, and somewhat fat Song Hama looked as though he had changed into another person. His body was as thin as a matchstick, and the skin on his face was sticking to his bones. His lips were pale and dry. From the looks of it, his body was in a very bad state. If things continued like this, Song Hama might die in a few years due to mental and physical exhaustion. At this time, Song Hama was sitting on a chair. When he saw Gohan forcefully breaking the door open, he raised his eyelids, and his expression finally changed. He opened his mouth, seemingly wanting to say something. But in the end, Song Hama still shut his mouth and maintained a deathly silence. The nearby Zhao Hao, who was feeling somewhat awkward, suddenly discovered that the person sitting on the chair was holding a broken sword maiden in his bosom. After studying sword maidens for dozens of years, Zhao Hao immediately recognized that it was an innate sword maiden. Interesting. At this time, Zhao Hao's work instinct surged. He immediately stepped forward, wanted to take a closer look at the broken cloud cast iron in Song Hama's bosom. What are you trying to do? Nobody is allowed to touch my cloud cast iron. After seeing that Zhao Hao wanted to touch his sword maiden, Song Hama finally became agitated. He punched Zhao Hao's chest, wanted to push him away. Stop! After seeing this scene, Gohan used his sword chi to block. However, his target wasn't Zhao Hao, but Song Hama, who was trying to push Zhao Hao away. With Gohan's help, Zhao Hao smoothly grabbed the broken cloud cast iron. On the other hand, Song Hama was tightly bound by Gohan's sword Chi, unable to budge. Sour Popsicle, what are you trying to do? Let me go. Nobody is allowed to touch my cloud cast iron. Song Hama shouted crazily. His voice was so loud and painful that even Papa Song and Mama Song, who were outside the living room, could hear him clearly. Mama Song instinctively wanted to rush in to help her son, but she was grabbed by Papa Song, who was behind her. Believe in Little Han. He won't harm the toad. Papa Song said firmly. Sir Tianri, do you think this cloud cast iron can still be saved? After waiting for a few minutes, Gohan asked Zhao Hao, who was carefully examining the cloud cast iron. Using traditional methods, it's impossible to save this cloud cast iron unless we find a great master. We can only throw it in the sword burial land and wait for it to recover on its own. After saying this much, Zhao Hao suddenly revealed a complacent smile. But if we use my new method, that might not be the case. I'm at least 70% sure that I can save this cloud cast iron. Chapter 762. What? What did you say? Song Hama, who had been frantically struggling, suddenly froze. He was not deaf, and naturally heard Zhao Hao's words clearly. I said that I have a 70% chance of saving this cast cloud iron. Zhao Hao repeated his own words. Is what you said true? Hearing Zhao Hao's words, hot tears suddenly flowed down Song Hama's skinny face. The tears uncontrollably flowed down his face like a waterfall. Sour Popsicle, let go of me. Let go of me. Don't worry. I'm not going to do anything to this master. I'm going to kneel before this master. Let go of me, Song Hama said emotionally. Thus, Gohan loosened the sword Chi binding Song Hama's body. Song Hama knelt in front of Zhao Hao and kowtowed, as if his life depended on it. Master, if you can save this cast cloud iron, I, Song Hama, will never forget your great kindness. Well said, well said. Zhao Hao helped Song Hama up. Since you're Lord Gohan's friend, you're my friend as well. Moreover, this is my job to begin with. Helping you repair this sword maiden is not a problem. Thank you, Master. Song Hama's tears flowed even more quickly. These were tears of joy and excitement. It's fine, it's fine. Zhao Hao smiled. However, you might have to wait for a few more months. I first need to carefully study the cast cloud iron's material, then create a material that is exactly the same as the cast cloud iron itself. Only then can I start repairing it. This will take at least 3 months, so you'll have to wait patiently. Let alone 3 months. Even if it's 3 years or 30 years, I'm willing to wait. Song Hama was so excited that he could not speak clearly. As long as the cast cloud iron could be revived, he was willing to wait as many days as it took. Although Song Hama had no objections, 3 months felt like a long time to Gohan. From the looks of it, Zhao Hao was not following the original path of repairing a broken sword. Instead, he planned to use the materials he had concocted to repair the cast cloud iron into 2 sword ladies. This was a completely new method, and no one knew if it would succeed. The Zhongyan sword that he had repaired previously had not been synchronized, so no one knew if it would be successfully repaired. Thus, Gohan did not intend to use the method that Zhao Hao had researched to repair the cast cloud iron. Grandmaster Tianri, 3 months is too long. Do you have any other way to quickly repair the cloud cast iron? Gohan asked. Quickly repair the cloud cast iron. Zhao Hao frowned. The cloud cast iron is different from the Zhongyan sword. This is a giant sword forged from meteoric iron. Meteoric iron comes from space. The composition of iron is very strange, and there are many different trace elements. It will take me at least 3 months to completely analyze the material of the cast cloud iron. I say, Comrade Gohan, there are some things that should not be rushed. You can't drink hot soybean milk if you are impatient. That's right, Sour Popsicle. 3 months is already good enough. There's no need to bring it forward. I have the patience to wait. Song Hama said. Then let me ask you this. Grandmaster Tianri, can you use the old method to repair this cloud cast iron? Gohan asked. I can't. Zhao Hao's face turned red. If I could do it, I wouldn't be Grandmaster Tianri. I will be Grandmaster Tianri. Then let me ask again. If I use the furnace of heaven and earth, can I repair this cloud cast iron? Gohan asked again. What? What did you say? Tell me what you said about that furnace again. Zhao Hao suddenly grabbed Gu Han's hand and asked in a very excited and hurried manner. I'm talking about the furnace of heaven and earth. If I use the furnace of heaven and earth, can I use the old method to repair this cloud cast iron? Gohan repeated. The furnace of heaven and earth. You actually know about the furnace of heaven and earth. Grandmaster Tianri muttered to himself. If I use the furnace of heaven and earth, it might really be possible. But the furnace of heaven and earth hasn't been activated for hundreds of years. It needs a lot of sovereign blood. Gohan took the initiative to speak for Zhao Hao. Don't worry about the sovereign blood. I've already obtained enough sovereign blood to activate the furnace of heaven and earth. Who are you? Who are you? Even if Lord Liu Lei was here, he might not be able to gather enough sovereign blood to activate the furnace of heaven and earth. It's not just Lord Liu Lei. In this world, perhaps only the Lun Yin family has such a reserve. Who are you? How can you gather so much sovereign blood? Zhao Hao's expression was like that of a frightened child. You don't need to know who I am. All you need to know is that I have so much sovereign blood. You just need to answer me. Can you or can you not? Can you use the furnace of heaven and earth to repair the cloud cast iron? Gohan pressed. Yes, absolutely. Zhao Hao's eyes instantly lit up. The furnace of heaven and earth is the greatest power in the world, let alone a mere ancient sword lady. It's said that even if a sovereign sword lady is broken, it can be repaired in the furnace of heaven and earth. It's said that a sovereign sword lady like that was repaired in the furnace of heaven and earth. However, I don't know which sovereign sword lady it was. Then there's nothing more to say. Stinky Toad, pack up. We'll leave now. Gohan turned and said to Song Hama, Where are we going? Where are you taking me? Song Hama was in a state of confusion. He had no idea what Gohan was talking about, nor did he know what the furnace of heaven and earth was, nor did he know where Gohan was taking him. You don't need to worry about that. Just follow me. Do you think I'd harm you? After Gohan spoke, Song Hama instantly lost his temper. He jumped up from his original position and started to pack his things. Zhao Hao suddenly moved closer to Gohan, a flattering expression on his face. Gohan, are you going to activate the furnace of heaven and earth now? That's right. Gohan nodded. Then can you bring me along? Zhao Hao's expression became even more flattering. To a sword-forging grandmaster, the furnace of heaven and earth was an irresistible temptation. To be able to personally see the furnace of heaven and earth forge a treasured sword, even if Zhao Hao died, it would be worth it. Actually, it's not that easy to activate the furnace of heaven and earth. It requires a lot of professional skills, let alone something as important as repairing the cloud cast iron. Master Gohan, please believe me. Bringing me along will definitely not go wrong, Zhao Hao said excitedly and started to sell himself. All right then. Gohan nodded. In fact, Gohan had originally planned to bring Zhao Hao along. After all, Gohan did not have any experience in repairing the sword mistress in the furnace of heaven and earth. If something went wrong, he would not even know how to fix it. Therefore, if possible, Gohan wanted to bring a sword-forging grandmaster along. Zhao Hao had volunteered himself. Who else could Gohan bring if not him? Mom, I need to go out with Sour Popsicle. I'll be gone for about 4 to 5 days. Don't worry about me, right? Hurry up and prepare some food for me. I'm starving to death. The worried Papa Song and Mama Song were looking at the door and guessing what was happening inside. They were guessing whether or not that sword forging master would be able to cure Song Hama's illness. At the very least, Song Hama should be able to eat something first. However, they did not expect that the doctor would be so effective. Song Hama, who hadn't left his room for more than 10 days, suddenly jumped out on his own. Moreover, he was in high spirits. He even said that he was starving to death and wanted to eat. This made Papa Song and Mama Song very happy. The food that they had just heated up was quickly brought out. Song Hama immediately started to wolf down the food. Good, very good. That Stinky Toad, finally. Seeing her son wolf down the food, Mama Song couldn't help but cry tears of joy. Sparkling and translucent tears flowed out of her eyes. That's a good thing. Why are you crying? Papa Song's eyes also became moist. What are you doing here? Quickly take out the fat goose from the fridge. This toad loves to eat braised goose. Oh, 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 I'll go right away. Mama Song immediately went to the kitchen to take out a fat goose. However, she was stopped by Gahan, who was just about to leave the room. Mama Song, you don't need to cook anymore. The toad and I are about to leave, and we don't have enough time. Leave? Where are you going? Mama Song asked, puzzled. The toad's illness has just been cured. He needs to rest at home for a few days before leaving. The toad's illness can only be cured after leaving this room. Trust me, I won't harm the toad. Gahan said sincerely. But Mama Song wanted to say something, but was stopped by Papa Song. Just listen to Little Han. Little Han won't harm the toad. The toad has been staying at home for a long time. It's time for it to see the sunlight outside. Last night, around 8 or 9 p.m., Gahan brought Fleeting Time Lena back to Yuzhong City through the small door. But this morning, at 8 or 9 o'clock, before 12 hours had passed, Gahan had left Yuzhong City through this small door again. This time, however, there were two more people with Gahan. One of them was Zhao Hao, who had an excited expression on his face, and the other was Song Hama, who had no idea what to do. When Gahan brought Zhao Hao and Song Hama to board his flying droplet car, the two of them were once again thoroughly shocked. Song Hama's shock was simply because of the cool features of the flying droplet car. It was like a person in the early 90s who suddenly saw an iPhone 7 Plus while holding a mobile phone. On the other hand, Zhao Hao's shock was not as simple as that. As a blacksmith, he was also a scientist. Zhao Hao was even more aware of the technological significance behind the flying car than Gahan. Therefore, Gahan's image in Zhao Hao's heart became more and more mysterious. Chapter 763. The furnace of heaven and earth was about 300 kilometers away from Yuzhong City. Although they encountered a few Yuan-Kos along the way, they still arrived at the mysterious, naturally formed furnace of heaven and earth smoothly. This was the first time Gahan had seen the furnace of heaven and earth in the real world. It was exactly the same as the furnace of heaven and earth in the Instance Dungeon. This furnace of heaven and earth was an extremely large basin. The basin was filled with sand and stones, and there was not a single tree or blade of grass in sight. There was no life in the basin at all. However, the furnace of heaven and earth was surrounded by lush trees and vegetation. There were even wild animals scurrying about in the forest. It was a completely different scene from the desert-like furnace of heaven and earth. The moment they arrived at the furnace of heaven and earth, Gahan really wanted to immediately start King Yu's rebirth forging. Unfortunately, this could not be done immediately because there was another thing in the furnace of heaven and earth. More accurately speaking, it was not a thing, but a Yuan-Ko covered in flames. This Yuan-Ko silently sat at the center of the furnace of heaven and earth. He closed his eyes and meditated like a monk, as if he was comprehending the mysteries of the furnace of heaven and earth. This Yuan-Ko's position was very awkward. It happened to be at the center of the furnace of heaven and earth, where Gahan was going to pour in the sovereign blood to restart the furnace of heaven and earth. Then, he would place the broken sword so that King Yu and the cloud cast iron could repair it. This way, Gahan would have to kill this Yuan-Ko, or else he would not be able to repair it. In fact, even if this Yuan-Ko was not there, Gahan would still kill this Yuan-Ko. This was the fate of the sword-bearer and Yuan-Ko. Why is that person's body on fire? Could it be that there's fuel stored in his body? Song Hama asked in puzzlement when he saw the flaming man. I told you to pay attention in class, or else you wouldn't not know the famous Yuan-Ko, Flame of Vengeance brand. Gahan rolled his eyes at Song Hama. What? This person is the Flame of Vengeance brand? Song Hama was shocked. Her finger was trembling slightly as she pointed at Brand. This was because Brand's reputation was too great, and the sins he had committed were too great for humans. Yuan-Ko's name, Vengeful Spirit Brand. Level, Meteor Two-Dimensional World, Digital World Yuan-Ko Faction, League of Legends. HP, 5 stars. Attack, 8 stars Agility, 5 stars Magic Power, 8 stars Ability, Bran's body is burning with flames. His only ability is to control these flames to avenge him. He could make the ground burn with a pillar of fire that soared into the sky, and he could also make people's bodies turn naturally. He could even shoot out flames that continuously shot between enemies. These were all very powerful offensive abilities. Ultimate move: Raging Flame Pillar, Raging Flame Burning, Raging Flame Storm. Introduction: a demonic half-human that exists in a two-dimensional digital game created by humans. They call themselves heroes. Because these people who like to call themselves heroes all came from the same two-dimensional world, they formed one of the top 10 factions in Yuan Co., the League of Legends. Although Flame Spirit of Vengeance Brand belonged to the League of Legends, he was ostracized by some of the League of Legends members due to his blood feud with the Yodel people in the League of Legends. He preferred to be alone and rarely had friends or helpers by his side. If you discover Brand, the Flame of Vengeance, please seriously evaluate your own strength. 4 sword wielders below Immortal Sword tier. Unless they were at the pinnacle of Spirit Sword tier and possessed a certain level of fire resistance, they should never engage in battle with Bullet. Otherwise, they would experience the fear of fire. Battle record: Brand is Yuan Co., who hates humans to the extreme. Once he finds a human, he will attack without hesitation. Since his appearance 300 years ago, there have been 721 recorded battles. Among them, 320 were against Ancient Sword Greatsword Wielders, 261 against Treasured Sword Greatsword Wielders, 145 against Famed Sword Greatsword Wielders, 70 against Spiritual Sword Greatsword Wielders, and 21 against Immortal Sword Greatsword Wielders. Battle results: Ancient Sword Greatsword Wielder successfully escaped 123 times. Treasured Sword Greatsword Wielder escaped 132 times. Famed Sword Greatsword Wielder escaped 104 times. Spiritual Sword Greatsword Wielder 123 times. Lost 45 times. Immortal Sword Greatsword Wielder 120 times. Lost 1 time, and died. Battle suggestion: if you encounter Brand, please escape immediately if you are below Spiritual Sword grade. Brand's pursuit ability is not strong. Even if you're an Ancient Sword Greatsword Wielder, as long as you find a way to escape into the river, you will be able to preserve your own life. Also, please do not try to start a group battle with Brand. Brand's Raging Flame Storm has a terrifying effect in group battles. The more people there are, the more powerful it will be. It is better to fight it alone. Song Hama looked at the information on Brand on his personal terminal again and couldn't help but click his tongue. From this information, it could be seen that this Brand had a terrifying ability to crush sword wielders below Spiritual Sword grade. His fatality rate was actually more than 60%. Moreover, when facing Spiritual Sword grade sword wielders of the same level, Brand was still able to maintain a 70% winning rate. He had even killed 2 Spiritual Sword grade sword wielders, which showed how terrifying his strength was. This was only the information recorded on his personal terminal. What left the deepest impression on Song Hama was the battle on Mount Zhongqiao more than 100 years ago. On that day, a team of more than 20 famed swordbearers had encountered Brand, the Flame of Vengeance. This team of sword wielders had an extremely powerful sword formation. With this formation, they could even fight with you grade Yuan Co. for more than 10 minutes and escape unscathed. This team of sword wielders became famous and became influential figures at that time. However, it was this team of sword wielders that could fight with you grade Yuan Co. But when they faced Brand, they encountered the biggest disaster since the formation of the team. Among the 25 famed sword grade sword wielders, only 8 people escaped from Mount Zhongqiao. The other 17 people stayed there forever. Out of the 8 people who had been rescued, 6 of them had been afflicted with a phobia of fire. Once they saw fire, they would be as terrified as a mouse seeing a cat. They would cower in a corner and wail. These 6 famed sword-rank swordbearers were completely crippled. Among the 8 people, the other 2 people survived and became active on the battlefield again. Later, one of them became an Immortal Sword grade sword wielder. As soon as he became an Immortal Sword grade sword wielder, he carried his Immortal Sword grade sword mistress and searched the world for traces of Brand. He swore to kill Brand to avenge his brother. In the end, this immortal grade sword wielder encountered Brand 6 times. Although he fought with all his strength each time and defeated Brand each time, Brand still escaped. When this immortal grade sword wielder died, he muttered to his descendants to find a way to kill Brand and eliminate this scourge for humanity. Unfortunately, this immortal grade sword wielder's descendants did not live up to expectations. Since then, they disappeared in the river of history. There was no news of them ever again. Because of this immortal grade sword wielder's persistent pursuit, Brand was also heavily injured. Especially in the last battle with Brand, it was said that Brand was so miserable that only his eyes could not withstand the flames. The flames on the other parts of his body were all extinguished. If it was not for the strength of Demacia, Garen, and the Radiant Maiden, Larks, siblings from the League of Legends, who arrived in time, Brand would have died in the hands of this immortal grade sword wielder. Although Bulleit had luckily escaped with his life, it was said that Bulleit was on his last breath. He had disappeared for almost 100 years and had never appeared in front of humans again. Who would have thought that he was actually hiding in the furnace of heaven and earth? However, on second thought, otherwise it was reasonable that he would hide in the furnace of heaven and earth. This was because the furnace of heaven and earth was the place in the whole world where the flames of heaven and earth were the most vigorous. For Yuan Ko, which was made of pure fire elements like Brand, the place with the most vigorous flames was the best place for him to be injured. Therefore, the furnace of heaven and earth became the best place for him to heal his injuries. Gohan, let's retreat a little and then report Brand's situation to Yuzhong City. Ask Yuzhong City to send a spirit grade sword wielder to deal with Brand. We can just watch the show from the side. Song Hama said to retreat a little, but in fact, he was advising Gohan to escape. According to the advice given to Song Hama on his personal terminal, the best method at this time was indeed to escape. If you encounter Flame of Vengeance Brand, please escape immediately if you are below Spirit Sword grade. These were the original words on his personal terminal. It was an order given by the Sword Committee to the sword wielder. Song Hama naturally had a clear conscience in escaping. Song Hama could escape, but Gohan could not. This was the furnace of heaven and earth. If Brand stayed here to heal, what would happen to Gohan? If Brand stayed here for another 100 years, would Gohan have to wait for him for another 100 years? Of course, Gohan could also call for support from Yuzhong City. If 2 or 3 Spirit Sword grade sword bearers came, they would be able to drive Brand out. But in this way, Gohan's purpose would also be exposed. The furnace of heaven and earth would have to become the focus of the whole Yuzhong City, and Gohan's behavior would also be exposed to everyone. More importantly, after the big attack, Gohan had never really fought with Yuan Ko again. Gohan now wanted to know, after having 2 times more sword elements than at that time, after using the most powerful famous sword, the Juzi Sword of Sword Maiden, and after roughly mastering the chaos swordsmanship that he created, how far had Gohan's strength grown? Before this, Gohan could defeat the Nether-grade Yuan Ko Archer Sage when he fought with all his strength. However, the Archer Sage was not a strong opponent among the Nether-grade Yuan Ko. Ordinary Spirit Sword grade sword bearers could also defeat the Archer Sage. And at this time, Brand, who stayed in the furnace of heaven and earth, was indeed a very difficult opponent among the Meteor-grade Yuan Ko. In the Yuan Ko list published by humans, Brand was also ranked in the top 50 among the Meteor-grade Yuan Ko. If Gohan could defeat such an opponent, then under the U grade, there would be no Yuan Ko that could defeat Gohan. This was a battle that even Gohan himself was not sure of the outcome. Chapter 764. Who dares to disturb the slumber of the flame? When Gohan approached Brand with the Juzi sword, Brand, who had been closing his eyes, suddenly opened them. Obviously, he had sensed Gohan's arrival. Yuzhong City's sword bearer Gohan greets Senior Brand. Although this was an opponent he had to kill, Gohan still maintained basic respect for Brand. After all, the other party was also a monster who had lived for hundreds of years. In terms of age, he could be considered as Guhan's great-great-great-great-grandfather. Another guy who wants to die, Bran said in a low voice with disdain. Damn human. The flame gave you a chance to live for a few more days. Tell the flame what time it is now. How many years has the flame been silent? Every time Brant opened his mouth, the word flame was used to replace the word me. It seemed that Brant no longer treated himself as a human. He already felt that he was a ball of flame. It's the year 3008, senior. Guhan replied, Don't tell me the human's time. I'm not interested in your human's time. You have to tell me the flame's time. Brand roared. Regarding this, Guhan could only express his helplessness. Even if Guhan was the protagonist, it was impossible for him to know the flame's time. Tell me, how long has it been since the collapse of Zhanjin College? Brand seemed to realize that Guhan couldn't know the flame's time, so he asked another question. Guhan was very clear about this question. The original gathering place of League of Legends was on the Alps in northern Europe and was named Zhanjin College. However, when the Alps battle broke out, facing the fiercest battle between humans and Yuan Ko, League of Legends was unable to resist. Zhanjin College was also destroyed. Since then, League of Legends had been wandering for a while. It wasn't until the establishment of Demacia that League of Legends regained its foothold. It has been 370 years. Guhan replied without hesitation. The destruction of Zhanjin College and the end of the Alps battle happened in the same year. This is a knowledge that every human needs to memorize when they are still in school. So, I've been asleep for almost 90 years. Bullet sighed. To think that this fellow had actually stayed in the heaven and earth furnace for 90 years. Were humans fools? They didn't even know that Yuan Ko had stayed in the heaven and earth furnace for 90 years. Human, I've already let you live for 10 more flames. You could die now. After Bran knew the exact time, Guhan was completely useless to him. He casually threw a flame at Guhan, intending to burn him to ashes. Same here. I also think that Senior should go to hell. Guhan swung the juicy sword in his hand as if he was swatting a fly, deflecting the flames thrown by Brand. Human, I hope your strength is as reliable as your mouth. Seeing that Guhan had deflected his flames with a single strike, Brand's eyes that were burning with raging flames revealed a cautious look. He had been fighting with humans for almost 200 years. He had a very clear understanding of the strength of humans. To be able to deflect his flames with a single strike, such strength was sufficient for them to fight for hundreds of rounds. Flame Pillar. Bullet didn't underestimate Guhan. At the first moment, he controlled the huge flame force around him. In an instant, the sandy ground under Guhan's feet turned into a mass of magma. Then, a huge flame pillar rose from Guhan's feet into the sky, enveloping Guhan's entire figure in this flame. This flame pillar was so huge, with a radius of about 1 kilometer. Almost half of the heaven and earth furnace was covered by the flame pillar. It looked as if the heaven and earth furnace had been reactivated. Oh my God, this isn't right. Bullet's flame pillar shouldn't have such a large range. Song Hama's eyeballs were about to fall out of their sockets after witnessing this. According to the information provided by his personal terminal, Bullet's flame pillar should only be a flame pillar with a diameter of about 100 meters. However, this flame pillar had already exceeded 1 kilometer in diameter. It was more than 10 times stronger than Bullet's original ability. Could it be that after 90 years of cultivation, this damn Bullet's ability has advanced? Song Hama was dumbfounded. However, on second thought, this didn't seem right. Increasing his ability by 10 times was no longer a simple improvement. This was already in the category of advancement. Bullet was no longer the original Meteor rank Yuan Ko. He had reached the standard of the universe rank Yuan Ko. He could be considered as a human immortal sword wielder. No, I have to save Sour Popsicle. After a moment of shock, Song Hama remembered that Guhan had already been engulfed by the flames. He immediately ignored the fact that he didn't even have a sword maiden and rushed into the heaven and earth furnace to save Guhan. Stop. You just gonna die if you go. Fleeting Rena grabbed Song Hama's neck, and the defenseless Song Hama was unable to move. Before Gahan went looking for trouble with Bullet, he had already instructed Fleeting Rena to ensure Song Hama's safety. No matter what Song Hama wanted to do, she had to stop him. Don't worry, your childhood friend won't die so easily. He's a scourge that will last for thousands of years. Fleeting Rena would not let go of any opportunity to insult Gahan. Even Bullet himself had a look of disbelief on his face when he saw the towering flame pillar. Even he couldn't believe that such a huge and terrifying flame pillar was unleashed by his own hands. However, he did not feel any extraordinary increase in his strength. Could it be because of this land? Bullet suddenly thought of the area with an unexpectedly high amount of fire elemental energy. Could it be that his increase in strength had something to do with this? At this moment, the monstrous pillar of flames finally disappeared. Within the flames, a figure slowly became clear again. After experiencing the baptism of the flame pillar, more than half of Guhan's clothes had been destroyed. Apart from his underwear, which was protected by a layer of sword aura, the rest of his clothes had disappeared. Compared to his destroyed clothes, Gahan's body was in good condition. His skin was as smooth as jade, and not a single burn mark could be seen on his body. It was as if he had just taken a bath. Not to mention, Guhan's body was still very strong. Even if he was not as strong as those professional bodybuilders, the muscles in his body were like the muscles of a beast lurking under his skin. As Guhan moved, a little towering mountain range was revealed from time to time. When he saw one of the women present, her heart suddenly palpitated. Pervert! Fleeting time, Rena let out a little bashfully and lowered her head, not daring to look at Guhan's body any longer. What a beautiful body! To think that I had such a perfect body back then. Bullet seemed to be immersed in Guhan's body as well. However, Bullet was immersed in his own past. This flaming man seemed to have spent a good period of time as a human. The heaven and earth furnace's ability to strengthen flames is truly terrifying. I didn't expect it to be 10 times stronger. Guhan lamented as he looked at the scorched area within a kilometer of him. At the same time, Guhan deeply touched the Juzi sword in his hand. If not for the protection of the Juzi sword, Guhan would not have been able to get through the pillar of flames so easily. At the very least, he would have lost a layer of skin. It seems that the sword mistress in your hand is very powerful. Bullet looked at the Juzi sword deeply. It was obvious that he had also realized the source of Gahan's terrifying fire resistance. However, a strange smile immediately appeared on Bullet's face. The flames are already burning on your body. You're about to experience the fear of fire. Gahan did not seem to notice that his body was not completely unharmed. There was still a small ball of flame burning on Gahan's hair, indicating that Gahan was already in a state of being ignited. Be careful of his sour popsicle. He's about to use Flame Brand. What Guhan didn't realize was discovered by Song Hama behind him. So Song Hama immediately shouted to remind Guhan. Too late. Sleep with the flames. A fireball the size of a bus shot out from Bullet's palm and shot towards Gahan. This was another of Bullet's skills, Flame Brand. Under normal circumstances, Flame Brand was not a very powerful skill. At most, it would cause some fire damage to the enemy, and the damage was not even as high as the Flame Pillar. However, Bullet's skill could ignite his opponent. Once Bullet's opponent was ignited, Flame Brand could activate the flames that Bullet had left on the opponent, stunning his opponent. Under normal circumstances, the duration of this stun was 10 seconds, but with the effect of Flame Brand being increased by 10 times, the duration of the stun would be increased to 100 seconds. This was enough for Bullet to kill Gahan 2 or 3 times. Terminus Ginny once said that directional skills were never something to be afraid of. As long as you can dodge them, that's enough. Looking at the fireball flying towards him, Guhan's figure leaned to the left, and he easily dodged the fireball. This human's positioning is quite good. My Flame Brand, which has been magnified by 10 times, actually did not hit him. Bullet's expression suddenly looked like his mother had died. Flame Brand had a cooldown period. Before the cooldown period ended, he was afraid that he would not be able to pose any threat to this human who was extremely fast. Chapter 765. Human. Bulit let out an angry roar. During the cooldown of the flame brand, Gahan launched a frenzied attack on Bulit. The Juzi sword constantly stabbed into Bulit's body, and every time the Juzi sword stabbed into him, Bulit could feel the flames in his body weaken a lot, as if this Juzi sword had the ability to absorb flames. The cooldown time of the flame pillar was much faster than the flame brand. During the cooldown time of the flame brand, Bulit had already used the flame pillar twice. This opponent took all the damage from the flame pillar, but just like before, the flame pillar did not pose much of a threat to Gahan. The Juzi sword had an extremely high flame resistance, and the flame pillar, which originally had extremely high damage, could originally lose 20% of the shield energy of an ordinary spirit sword level sword wielder, actually could not wear down 10% of Gahan's shield energy, and this was the flame pillar that had been strengthened by the heaven and earth furnace by 10 times. According to this calculation, the flame provided by the Juzi sword was about 2,000%, which was equivalent to 20 times the flame resistance. This was an extremely terrifying figure. This meant that all the flame-type opponents in front of Gahan would be weakened by 20 times. There was no need to fight, and it would be more straightforward to just admit defeat. However, Gahan quickly figured out why the Juzi sword was so awesome. The reason was the material of the Juzi sword. The Juzi sword was a treasure sword made from the trunk of the legendary Fusang tree. And the Fusang tree was the place where the 10 golden crows stopped. The golden crows were the legendary sun. No matter how awesome the flames on Bulit's body were, they could not compare to the flames of the sun. The Juzi sword naturally had an extremely high flame resistance. As a result, Bulit was very embarrassed when facing Gahan. The flames that were originally powerful to other sword holders were now insignificant to Gahan, and the only thing that could turn the situation around, the flame brand, was really difficult to hit Gahan. For example, just now, Bulit waited for his flame brand to cool down, and when Gahan rushed toward him, there was only a distance of less than 10 meters. Brant finally let out a laugh. When he felt that he was absolutely certain that he could hit Gahan, he smashed the flame brand towards Gahan's head. How could Gahan not understand Brand's intentions? In truth, he had charged at Brand in order to give Brand the opportunity to cast Flame Brand. 9 swords of mysterious heaven. Sword formation curtain. Gahan unleashed the top-notch movement technique of the 9 swords of mysterious heaven. He was able to evade the flame brand in a mere 10 meters. The second time the blazing brand was evaded was a fatal mistake for Brant. Brant was once again left wide open in front of Gahan. 9 swords of mysterious heaven, sword battle dome. A big move that contained 10,000 cork sword elements struck Brand's chest and pierced through it. Brant looked down at the Juzi sword that had pierced through his chest. He opened his mouth weakly, and with a bang, his body exploded into sparks. We won. Seeing this scene, Song Hama, who was watching from afar, finally let out a long sigh of relief. However, on second thought, Song Hama felt a little unhappy. He and Gahan had both become sword bearers on the same day. Logically speaking, at that time, Gahan had only met the requirement of 100 cork sword elements, while Song Hama had 200 cork sword elements. But now, Gahan had become a famed sword-tier swordsman, while Song Hama was still a pitiful ancient sword-tier swordsman. No matter how I think about it, I still feel unhappy. Song Hama pursed his lips. Although he knew that Gahan was a little stronger than him, he didn't think that this little bit would be so much. A famed sword-tier swordsman was able to kill a fallen sword-tier swordsman like Gahan. It's all my fault for slacking off for the past few weeks. Once the cloud cast iron is repaired, I'll definitely grind monsters with it. I can't be left behind by the sour popsicles. Song Hama was still thinking about his own matters when he suddenly heard Gahan's nervous voice. Stinky Toad, hurry up and scatter. ECI could vaguely hear the voice. Scatter? Why should I scatter? Song Hama raised his head in confusion. He saw Fleeting Time Rina and Zhao Hao frantically running away from Song Hama, while a ball of flame slowly floated towards him. The ball of flame seemed slow, but in reality, it was incredibly fast. By the time Song Hama reacted, the ball of flame had already appeared in front of him. Brant had actually escaped to Song Hama's side. Brant's body had dissipated, but he was not dead. Instead, he hid his soul in the core of his body and flew to Song Hama's side. Since you are that human's friend, then you shall die in his place. Brant's voice was like that of a dying wolf, but the hatred in his voice could not be concealed. It seemed that Brant had decided to kill Gahan's friend to vent his anger after realizing that he could not kill Gahan. Blaze! Brant only realized that something was wrong after he shouted the two words. He began to run away in panic. Storm. Unfortunately, he was too late. Brant had finally unleashed his ultimate skill. A stream of flames flowed out of Brant's body like a stream of water, and it charged towards Song Hama, who was less than 20 meters away from him. Even at a distance of 20 meters, Song Hama could still feel the intense heat coming from the opposite side. The hair on his body had already started burning at this moment. In less than a second, the stream of flames would pour into Song Hama's body like a stream of water. Everyone could imagine the effect of the ultimate skill of a fireman equipped with the 6 God equipment on a level 0 unequipped Chick. There was no doubt that Chick would go back to soak in the spring. Little Yun Yun, I don't want to die yet. Chick did not even have the strength to run away. He could only shout the name of Cast Cloud Iron one last time before closing his eyes and waiting for death. At this moment, a young girl suddenly descended from the sky. She held a black wooden sword in her hand and stood in front of Song Hama. The stream of flames directly collided with the young girl's sword. The young girl frowned, and her body went limp as she knelt on one knee. Fortunately, the injury did not seem to be serious. The stream of flames quickly flowed out of the young girl's body and flowed in another direction. Little Yun Yun, are you here to save me? Song Hama was in a trance. He seemed to see Cast Cloud Iron standing in front of him. I'm not Little Yun Yun. I'm Master's Juzi. Juzi said expressionlessly. Just now, Song Hama was about to be swallowed by Fireman's flaming storm. Gahan could only use all his strength to throw his Juzi sword in front of Song Hama. Then, he let the Juzi sword transform in midair and used his Juzi sword to block Brant's flaming storm. However, flaming storm was a skill that could continuously bounce and flow in the enemy's body and could not be dodged. The so-called undodgeable meant that even Gahan could not rely on his own body to dodge this skill. When the flaming storm hit the Juzi sword with its amazing fire resistance, it did not have any effect. Song Hama was blocked by Juzi and could not be touched. The flaming storm actually turned around and swept towards Gahan, who was rushing over. Master! Seeing this, Juzi immediately wanted to run back to Gahan's side and help Gahan block the flowing flaming storm. Without her in Gahan's hands, with Gahan's body as a sword-class swordsman, it would be impossible for him to block the terrifying damage of the flaming storm. Don't move. Just protect the stinky toad. Faced with Juzi's attempt, Gahan immediately stopped her. It had not been easy to save Song Hama's life. Gahan would not let Song Hama take any more risks. Moreover, this was just a ball of fire. He did not believe that he could not withstand the attack of this flame with his remaining strength. Gahan turned around and held the heavenly sword in his hand. Then, he raised the sword to face the flaming storm that was about to rush into his body. Unfortunately, because Juzi was in a liberated state, Gahan could only use the blade of the heavenly sword. He could not use the heavenly sword skills. Otherwise, with the heroic state provided by the heavenly sword, Gahan was confident that he could easily neutralize this ball of fire. Come on, 9 swords of mysterious heaven, sword of the spring. A small umbrella of sword energy appeared at the tip of the heavenly sword. Gahan was ready to receive the first attack from the flaming storm. At this critical moment, a small head suddenly emerged from Gahan's hair. The small head turned around and suddenly discovered the flaming storm flying towards Gahan. An extremely happy smile appeared on the small head's face. The small head struggled to free its wings from Gahan's messy hair. Then, it flapped its wings and flew out of Gahan's hair to receive the flaming storm head-on. One pour. The small elf's hair was red. Therefore, Gohan could immediately tell that it was one of the eight poor elves. This little guy, why is he heading towards that flaming storm out of the blue? Does she want to die? Of course. One Poor was not looking for death. As soon as the fierce ball of fire came close to One Poor's body, One Poor opened its mouth and sucked as if it were milk. The water-like flame was sucked into one's mouth like milk. Burp! One Poor burped and spat out the last bit of flame from its mouth. The shockingly hot flaming storm was completely swallowed by One Poor. After eating the flame, One Poor still did not seem satisfied. It looked at Gohan expectantly, as if asking Gohan if there were any more milk-like flames like this. When he saw this, his life was completely extinguished. Chapter 766. Damn it, you actually dared to hit my brother. Poor Brand. Even after his death, he didn't feel at ease. Song Hama still whipped his corpse. It turned out that when Song Hama saw Brand turn into a flame that was as weak as a candle flame, he was immediately enraged. He picked up his Cast Cloud iron broken sword and used the remaining blade of the broken sword to stab the candle flame. Even though it was a broken sword, a sword maiden was still a sword maiden. It still had the ability to cause harm to Yuan Ko. Therefore, Brand's last bit of unlucky candle flame was completely extinguished under the attack of the Cast Cloud Iron. Immediately after, a spatial vortex opened up around the candle flame. This meant that Brand was completely dead. It was impossible for him to have faked his death. Hurry up and absorb the sword essence in the dimensional vortex. Song Hama patted Juzi's shoulder and urged Juzi. Juzi nodded. The hilt of her sword was in her hand, so it was very convenient for her to extend her small hand into the dimensional vortex. However, in less than 2 seconds, Juzi retracted her hand. I didn't open this dimensional vortex. I can't absorb the sword essence inside. Juzi suddenly said to Gohan, why can't you absorb it? Your master clearly defeated Yuan Ko. Song Hama said in confusion. I didn't defeat him. You defeated him, Stinky Toad. Gohan returned to Song Hama's side and punched him hard on the shoulder. Don't forget how you avenged me just now. Song Hama only reacted after hearing Gohan's words. It turned out that Yuan Ko had been stabbed to death by his own broken sword. After understanding this, Song Hama's face instantly turned sour. I don't want to. Sour Popsicle was obviously the one who killed it. I just randomly slapped it a few times at the end. Am I not taking advantage of you? Get lost. That's not the only thing you've taken advantage of. Gohan kicked Song Hama and looked at the dimensional vortex that was about to close. Hurry up and put the Cast Cloud Steel hilt in. Although the Cast Cloud Steel is broken, its ability to store sword essences should still be there. If you don't store the sword essences, it'll all be wasted. No, even if it's a waste, I won't take advantage of you. Song Hama said firmly. I didn't ask you to take advantage of me. Consider it as me lending it to you. When you kill a Meteor Yuan Ko in the future, you will be returning it to me. Gohan said. Song Hama's frown finally eased. In essence, Song Hama was not someone who liked to be stubborn. After swearing that he would return the Meteor Yuan Ko's dimensional vortex to Gohan, Gohan picked up the Cast Cloud Iron hilt and put into the dimensional vortex. The Stinky Toad can obtain about 5,000 sword essence from a Meteor Yuan Ko. Now, even if the Stinky Toad is half a famed sword wielder, he won't hold a grudge against me because of the huge gap between us, right? Seeing Song Hama excitedly absorb the Meteor Yuan Ko's sword essence, Gohan felt very gratified. Song Hama was someone that Gohan wanted to be friends with for life. He did not want to part ways with Song Hama because of some ridiculous reason. This was something that Gohan absolutely did not want to see. After Brand's interlude, the Heaven and Earth Furnace could finally be reactivated. At Zhao Hao's request, before pouring in the sovereign blood, Zhao Hao first scanned the entire Heaven and Earth Furnace. After confirming that there were no abnormalities, he gestured for Gohan to start the Heaven and Earth Furnace. Lord Gohan, don't worry. The Heaven and Earth Furnace is the most mysterious furnace in the world. It has the power to automatically repair all metal objects. As long as the cast cloud iron lady is placed in the heaven and earth furnace, it will automatically repair itself. There is no need for us humans to interfere at all. Zhao Hao once again assured Gahan and Song Hama that repairing the cast cloud iron was very simple and that there would be no accidents. TSK. However, this is truly extravagant. You used 4,000 cubic centimeters of sovereign blood to repair an ancient sword lady. I say, Lord Gahan, are you the grandson-in-law of the Lun Yin family? The Lun Yin family treats you too well. Don't ask me how I know. It's the Lun Yin family that gave you the sovereign blood. Didn't you see the Lun Yin family's logo on the box? Hearing Zhao Hao refer to Gahan as the grandson-in-law of the Lun Yin family, Fleeting Time Rina looked at Gahan with a complicated expression. She then lowered her head, not wanting anyone to see her expression. It's not that simple. Gahan shook his head, then took out the Zhongyan sword and placed it next to the Juzi sword. This was to allow King Yu's soul to quickly find the Zhongyan sword's body when the heaven and earth furnace's flames were at their strongest, and then enter the Zhongyan sword's body. Lord Gahan, you're holding the wrong one. You're holding the soulless Zhongyan sword. Zhao Hao hurriedly said, if you want to be safe and completely repair the Zhongyan sword lady, then take out the soulless Zhongyan sword lady. You're holding the wrong one. Gahan did not say anything. Instead, he took out the soulless Zhongyan sword and put it down quite a distance away from the Juzi sword. Zhao Hao was right. Only the heavens knew if his method would work. For the sake of the sword lady, it was better to completely repair the Zhongyan sword while the heaven and earth furnace was activated. What about you, Rina? What do you want to repair? Gahan remembered that Fleeting Time Wooden Fish had mentioned that Fleeting Time Rina also needed the heaven and earth furnace. So Gahan asked Fleeting Time Rina, don't worry about me. It's got nothing to do with you. Fleeting Time Rina rebuked Gahan. Gahan did not say anything else. Now that everything was ready, all that was left was to pour in the sovereign's blood and activate the heaven and earth furnace. Gahan opened the chest filled with sovereign's blood and followed I Ching's instructions. He took out 5,000 cubic centimeters of sovereign's blood, which was equivalent to 50 test tubes containing 100 cubic centimeters of sovereign's blood. He then opened the test tubes and poured the sovereign's blood, which had been sealed for who knew how long, into the heaven and earth furnace. As the last bottle of sovereign blood was poured into the furnace, just like what had happened in the instance dungeon, the heaven and earth furnace started to metallize, revealing its gold-like body. Beautiful, so beautiful. Mother Nature is indeed the greatest forger of swords. Only Mother Nature could create such a great furnace of heaven and earth. Seeing that, Zhao Hao became like a devout believer. He knelt on the metal body of the heaven and earth furnace and kept uttering pious praises. It's time to go, Gahan said to Song Hama as he looked at the furnace of heaven and earth and estimated the time it would take for the lid to appear. He had already told Song Hama about the lid, and Song Hama did not dare to delay. She immediately pulled Zhao Hao, who was still praising the furnace of heaven and earth, and ran out of the furnace of heaven and earth. Gahan's expression changed when he noticed that Fleeting Time Rina was still standing in her original position. Miss Rina, please leave this place. However, Fleeting Time Rina ignored Gahan's words and did not respond to him at all. For the sake of the sovereign's blood, Gahan sighed. He suddenly turned around and ran back to the center of the furnace of heaven and earth. He grabbed Fleeting Time Rina by the waist and pulled her into his embrace as he ran out of the furnace of heaven and earth. Fortunately, Gahan reacted in time. By the time he left the furnace of heaven and earth with Fleeting Time Rina, a transparent lid had already appeared on the furnace of heaven and earth. Who do you think is better, humans or Yuan Ko? Is there really that much of a difference between a human and a Yuan Ko? Fleeting Time Rina, who was in Gahan's embrace, blurted out the question. What kind of question is that? There's nothing to compare a human to a Yuan Ko. Yuan Ko deserves to die. Gahan replied indifferently. Is that so? I understand now. Fleeting Time Rina's voice was filled with sorrow. Fleeting Time Rina, who was in Gahan's embrace, suddenly felt as if she had turned into a gust of wind as she floated out of Gohan's embrace. Upon seeing this, Gohan suddenly recalled how fleeting time Rina had fought Qingpin in the Miling Mountain range when she was still Rina Takasaka. "You're the one who gave me the answer." Just as the furnace lid was about to completely cover the heaven and earth furnace, fleeting Rina leaped into the gap between the furnace lid and the furnace lid. Gohan instinctively wanted to rush down to save fleeting time Rina, but when he saw that the heaven and earth furnace's lid was about to close in less than 0.2 seconds, he stopped his tracks and watched as fleeting time Rina jumped into the center of the heaven and earth furnace. "You jumped down on your own. It has nothing to do with me." Gohan silently selected the video recording function on his personal terminal and saved the video of fleeting time Rina's actions. This way, when the fleeting family came to cause trouble for Gohan, Gohan would have an excuse to defend himself. Of course, he felt that the video recording would not be useful in the end. The fleeting family should have predicted fleeting time Rina's actions, and their intention was to lure fleeting time Rina into the heaven and earth furnace. Although the inside of the heaven and earth furnace was covered by the scarlet flames, Gohan, who was standing outside, could not feel the heat at all. All the heat was blocked by the lid of the heaven and earth furnace. However, this did not mean that Gohan was blind. He did not know what was going on inside the heaven and earth furnace. This was because Gohan still maintained his connection with the Juzi sword in the heaven and earth furnace. He understood the changes in the heaven and earth furnace through the Juzi sword. Fleeting Rina's corpse has completely disappeared. She did not turn into ashes. A dimensional whirlpool appeared and sucked fleeting Rina's corpse into it. Juzi sword's words confirmed Gohan's suspicions. Fleeting Rina was indeed Yuan Ho. This also explained her question to Gohan. Are humans or Yuan Ko better? Are there really so many differences between Yuan Ko and humans? Fleeting time Rina asked such a strange question because she knew that he was Yuan Ko. Fleeting time Rina knew that she was about to die, and the fleeting family would never accept the existence of a Yuan Ko in their family. Gohan could imagine that something must have happened between fleeting time Rina's father and a female Yuan Ko, resulting in the birth of fleeting time Rina. This was a story that could be written into a melodramatic romance novel with hundreds of thousands of words. But the problem was, if the fleeting time family really didn't want fleeting Lena to exist in this world, why didn't they kill her the moment she was born? Why did she have to go all the way to the furnace of heaven and earth to commit suicide? Gohan quickly found the answer to this question. Chapter 767. In truth, Gohan had seen fleeting Rina turn to ash with his own eyes. This was because Gohan was using the Juzi sword's perspective. As the flames burned, Gohan saw Rina Takasaka's originally beautiful body rapidly turn into charcoal. Her beautiful face also withered in an instant, turning into a terrifying pile of coal. Fleeting Rina's body was like a black dandelion. Her body was blown away by the strong wind caused by the flames, and the black ash was quickly blown away. Her skin was peeled off layer by layer, followed by the fat and organs beneath her skin, and finally her bones. Everything disappeared without a trace. It was a pity that Gohan did not see fleeting Rina's expression at that time. He did not know how she felt when she faced the flames that buried her. Following that, a dimensional vortex appeared, sucking in all the dust that had been scattered in all directions into the vortex in his body. After seeing fleeting Rina completely incinerated by the flames, Gohan no longer had any interest in using the Juzi sword's perspective to observe the situation inside the heaven and earth furnace. He listened to Juzi report the latest information to Gohan. Master, the Zhongyan sword has turned pure white. Back in the Instance Dungeon, I Ching and Gohan had experienced the flames together. Thus, Gohan knew that the moment the forged sword mistress turned pure white, it meant that the most appropriate time to forge the sword mistress had arrived. Quick, King Yu, hurry up and enter the Zhongyan sword's body. Gohan immediately ordered King Yu, but what made Gohan's heart clench was that King Yu didn't respond to Gohan's request. Instead, He maintained a painful silence. Juzi, has King Yu entered the Zhongdian sword? Gahan had no choice but to ask Juzi. Master, Sister King Yu did not move. Her soul is still in Juzi's body. Juzi replied to Gahan. Juzi replied to the Guhan. This was the worst kind of Guhan. It meant that the King of Yu had relapsed at such a crucial moment. After leaving Yuzhong, Gahan communicated with King Yu, who had quietened down. After Gahan's persuasion, King Yu finally agreed to Gahan's request. However, Gahan could sense that King Yu was not very enthusiastic about his request. There was a possibility that she would change her mind at any time. As expected, at the crucial moment that decided King Yu's fate, King Yu changed her mind. Her aversion towards the Zhongdian sword made her unwilling to become an ancient swordplay. King Yu, listen to me. Gahan tried his best to persuade King Yu again. This time, Gahan said a lot, but King Yu remained silent. Finally, Gahan was infuriated by King Yu. King Yu, now is not the time for you to throw a tantrum. My patience with you is at its limit. If you don't go out, I'll... Before Gahan could finish, he heard Juzi say in pleasant surprise to Gahan, Master, Sister King Yu's soul has gone out. When Gahan heard this, he immediately shared Juzi's vision. At this moment, the heaven and earth furnace's temperature had already exceeded 1,000,000 degrees Celsius. This was a temperature that human technology could not produce on a large scale. At most, humans could only produce this temperature in a small laboratory. In order to maintain this temperature in such a large space, they would need to continuously explode 10 atomic bombs. Under this kind of temperature, everything began to distort. Some scenes that couldn't normally be seen appeared in front of Guhan's eyes. Souls. Normally, he would never be able to see his soul, but at this moment, it appeared right in front of Guhan. King Yu. Guhan looked at King Yu's figure floating in the air. Guhan knew that this was King Yu's soul. She had already left Juzi's body, but King Yu seemed to be hesitating. She was already standing next to Zhongdian. As long as she drilled down, she would be able to enter Zhongdian's body and complete her rebirth. But at this time, King Chu was still hesitating. Am I going to go from a famed sword maiden to a pitiful ancient sword maiden? A useless ancient sword maiden that everyone looks down on? King Yu thought to herself. She could feel the temperature around her that was over 1,000,000 degrees. The more she thought about it, the more unwilling she became. She did not want to accept this result, but whether it was the cold or the surroundings, they were forcing her to accept this result. If a human was here, they would have been vaporized by the high temperature, just like fleeting time Rina. Because King Yu appeared in the form of a soul, she could still maintain her existence in such a high temperature. However, she could not stay like this for long. The temperature was still rising, and King Yu could clearly feel her soul being damaged. Her soul source was also weakening. In just a few seconds, she felt as if she had turned from an 18-year-old girl to a 58-year-old Annie. In just a few more seconds, even if she was just a soul, she would dissipate in the flames. As she had left Juzi's body, King Yu could not hear what Gahan was saying to her. However, she knew that Gahan was about to go crazy from impatience. Consider it as me owing you in this lifetime. King Yu let out a long sigh. She finally had to accept her fate and become the new Zhongdian sword. She had no choice, as she had no way out. Either she became the Zhongdian sword, or she would die here and never meet Gahan again. In comparison, King Yu could only choose the first option. However, just as King Yu was about to give in, something unexpected happened. A ghost-like figure suddenly flashed in front of King Yu, and King Yu watched as the ghost charged into the Zhongdian sword's body. Following this, the Zhongdian sword exploded with light. This light was so dazzling that even her soul felt like her eyes could not take it anymore. Compared to his eyes, King Yu's heart was even more unbearable. Based on her previous experience, King Yu knew that once a soulless sword lady released such a light, it meant that the sword lady had regained her soul. The sword lady had been revived. The Zhongdian sword had been revived, but King Yu's soul was still standing beside it. King Yu knew better than anyone what this meant. Mother King Yu let out a miserable shriek. Then, Her soul could not endure the flames of the heaven and earth furnace and started to crumble bit by bit. Save me. I want to be with Gahan forever. At the last moment of her life, King Yu exploded with a powerful will to live. The last piece of her soul started to fly towards the Juzi sword behind her. Finally, before her soul completely dissipated, King Yu successfully returned to Juzi's body. King Yu. Outside the heaven and earth furnace, Gahan, who was sharing Juzi's vision, had lost control of her emotions. She anxiously and painfully called out King Yu's name. Master, Sister King Yu's soul is in great danger. She's on the verge of collapse. Even with the protection of my body, Sister King Yu's soul will disappear in a few minutes. Juzi calmly reported to Gahan. Calm down. Gahan, who had lost control of his emotions, once again displayed his astonishing control over his rationality. In just a few seconds, Gahan successfully stabilized his collapsing emotions through self-suggestion and recovered most of his rationality. Rina Takasaka, you tricked me again. This was the first thing that popped up in Gahan's mind after he recovered his rationality. Perhaps Juzi and King Yu didn't know who had entered the Sword of Destiny before King Yu did. However, Gahan managed to catch a glimpse of this soul at the last moment. This soul was none other than Rina Takasaka, whose body had completely dissipated and been sucked back by the dimensional vortex. No one expected that Rina Takasaka's soul wouldn't be sucked into the dimensional vortex, despite the dimensional vortex appearing. Instead, it remained in the heaven and earth furnace, waiting for the opportunity to snatch the Zhongjian sword's body. This was the second time Rina Takasaka had tricked Gahan. The last time, Rina Takasaka had almost made Gahan lose Qingpin. This time, she had made King Yu stand on the edge of a cliff of life and death. In a few more minutes, this cliff would completely collapse, and then there would be no more. Forget it. I don't have time to care about this woman now. I have to think of a way to preserve King Yu's soul. Gahan's mind began to turn rapidly. At that moment, the greatest danger King Yu faced was the problem of her soul. Her soul had been severely injured in the heaven and earth furnace. More than 95% of her soul had already dissipated, and the remaining 5% would completely disappear in a few minutes. This was an irreversible process. If a person lost their limbs and lost 50% of their body, they still had a chance of survival. However, if a person only had half of their brain left and the rest of their body was gone, they definitely wouldn't be able to survive. This was the situation King Yu was facing. He had to think of a way to restore King Yu's soul to the minimum strength that could maintain her existence. Otherwise, she would die without a doubt. Soul solution. That's right, I want soul solution. At this thought, Gahan immediately realized that the only thing that could save King Yu was soul solution. Only soul solution could quickly restore King Yu's soul to the strength that could maintain her existence. There was no other way. Chapter 768. Grandmaster Tianri, Soul Solution. Hurry up and give me the soul solution. Gahan immediately turned to Zhao Hao. Early this morning, Gahan had given the only bottle of soul solution he had to Zhao Hao to repair Zhong Dian's soul. Gahan only hoped that Zhao Hao hadn't used up the entire bottle of soul solution. Soul solution? Are you talking about the bottle you gave me this morning? Zhao Hao's reaction was quick. That's right. Repairing Zhong Dian's lady sword doesn't require an entire bottle of soul solution. You should still have half a bottle left. Gahan's eyes were filled with anticipation. He only hoped that Zhao Hao would tell him that he indeed had half a bottle of soul solution left. What half a bottle? It would be absurd if I had half a bottle. Zhao Hao mumbled, then took out a small bottle from his pocket and threw it in front of Gahan. With Gahan's reflexes, he only needed one finger to catch the bottle. However, Gahan nervously stretched out his hands to protect the bottle. Through the transparent glass, the light green solution could be seen clearly. That's right, this was soul solution. That's right, this was the highest quality soul solution. The bottle of soul solution had been opened, but not much of it had been used. About 4/5 of it was left in the bottle. It seemed like Grandmaster Tianri's abilities weren't just for show. He only used 1/5 of the soul solution to repair Zhong Dian's soul. The efficiency was astonishing. Gohan looked at Grandmaster Tianri gratefully. If there was only half a bottle of soul solution left, it might not be enough to repair Zhong Dian's soul to the point where it could maintain its existence. Now that there was still 4/5 of the soul solution left, it was foolproof. As long as Gohan poured this bottle of soul solution on Juzi's sword, it could nourish Zhong Dian's soul through Juzi's sword and maintain Zhong Dian's soul to the point where it could maintain its existence. The problem of the soul solution was solved, but there was an even bigger problem in front of Gohan, and that was how Gohan should pour this bottle of soul solution on the Juzi sword. At that moment, the furnace of heaven and earth had been completely covered by his lid. This lid, which even Jindy could not forcibly open, became the biggest tiger in front of Gohan. Gohan could only open this lid or drill a small hole in it to send the soul solution to the Juzi sword. But how is he going to open this extremely sturdy lid? Without thinking for too long, Gohan almost immediately took out a golden sword maiden from his dimensional pocket and gathered all the sword essence in his body into the sword maiden's body. Zhao Hao suddenly realized that Gohan had strangely stopped his body. He was holding a golden sword in his hand, and he was in a somewhat Chinibu posture. Then he just stood there, motionless. Young people are a bit Chinibu. Zhao Hao chuckled, then glanced at the golden sword mistress from the corner of his eye. Immediately, his entire body froze, as if he was frozen solid. What's going on? My eyes aren't playing tricks on me, right? This is impossible. Zhao Hao could not believe his eyes. He actually felt that the sword maiden in Gohan's hand looked like an Emperor's sword maiden. How is this possible? How could Gohan, a famed sword wielder, have an Emperor's sword maiden? Although this was what he thought, Zhao Hao could not suppress his curiosity at all. He quickly ran to Gohan's side and squatted at Gohan's feet. He did not mind if his actions were a bit inelegant and began to observe the golden sword maiden with full attention. There's no mistake. There's no mistake. This is the legendary Xian Yuan sword. After 3 minutes of observation, Zhao Hao finally covered his mouth and came to this conclusion. The golden sword maiden in Gohan's hand was 90% sure that it was the legendary Xian Yuan sword. One should never underestimate the judgment of a Grandmaster swordsman. If it was not for the fact that it was too unbelievable, Grandmaster Tianri could be 100% sure that this was the Xian Yuan sword. Master Gohan, can you let me hold the Xian Yuan sword in my hand and take a closer look? Although he knew that this request was a little too much, Grandmaster Tianri could not help but ask. There was no other way. No one in the world could resist the temptation of an Emperor's sword. Get out of my way. Not only did Gohan not agree to Grandmaster Tianri's request, he even pushed the defenseless Grandmaster Tianri tens of meters away. If you don't agree, then don't agree. If you don't want it, then don't. Why are you being so rough? Don't you know the traditional Chinese virtue of respecting the old and loving the young? Grandmaster Tianri grumbled unhappily as he stood up from the ground. Just as he was about to reprimand Gohan, he found that Gohan had already raised his Xian Yuan sword high up in the air. Then, as if he had exhausted all his strength and energy, he slashed at the lid of the furnace of heaven and earth without any way out. This was Gohan's only option. Gohan could only pour all the sword essence in his body into the Xian Yuan sword and use the sharpness of the Xian Yuan sword to force a crack in the lid of the cauldron of heaven and earth. Whether it would succeed or not, Gohan did not even have 30% confidence. That was why he could only leave himself no way out and use all the sword essence in his body to fight for this one chance. Unfortunately, Gohan's gamble did not succeed. The sharpness of the Xian Yuan sword was indeed indescribable. Even the lid of the cauldron of heaven and earth began to tremble under the attack of the Xian Yuan sword, but in the end, it only trembled slightly. Although Gohan had poured all the sword essence in his body into it, it was only a little over 40,000 sword essence. For a sword that required hundreds of thousands of sword essence to perform a single move, 40,000 sword essence was undoubtedly a drop in the bucket. In addition, Gohan had not synchronized with the Xian Yuan sword at all, so he could only borrow the sharpness of the Xianyuan sword itself. He could not even use 1% of the sword's power. So how could he possibly slash a crack in the lid of the cauldron of heaven and earth? I haven't failed yet. Even in this hopeless situation, Gahan still did not choose to give up. Because he had used up all the sword essence in his body, Gahan's body was terrifyingly weak. He could only rely on the Xianyuan sword to barely stand up. Although his attempt with the Xianyuan sword had failed, Gahan still had a trump card. However, the price of using this move was far too great. Gahan was not even sure if he would still be alive after using this move. But for the sake of the King of Yu, Gahan had no other choice. Just as Gahan was about to abandon everything and use this move, a clear, chirpy voice rang out next to Gahan's ear. "Gahan, Ife said she wants to eat." Qing Bin suddenly said this at an extremely inappropriate time. "If she wants to eat, then eat. Don't bother me with these kinds of questions," Gahan said to Qing Bin in annoyance. "Stupid Gahan, how dare you yell at Qing Bin?" Qing Bin had a temper that would explode at the slightest provocation. After hearing the disdain in Gahan's tone, Qing Bin immediately threw a tantrum. "You stinking baddie! Qing Bin will never tell you that Ife said she wants to eat that lid." "What?" Gahan was stunned. "What do you think Ife wants to eat? Lid? What a fragrant and sweet lid." The person who answered Gahan was not Qing Bin's lowly voice, but a voice that was even more childish than Qing Bin's lowly voice. It was like a weak and shy baby's voice. "Is this Ife talking?" Gahan was a little surprised. When did Ife grow to the point where she could talk? All right, that wasn't the point. The point was, what did Ife say she wanted to eat? She wanted to eat a fragrant and sweet lid? Although he wasn't sure what Yiping was thinking, Gahan still quickly pulled Yiping out of his hair and placed him on the lid of the cauldron. In the battle with Brant just now, because Yipiao had devoured Brant's ultimate move, he felt like he had eaten too much. He was lying in Gahan's hair and couldn't even fly. Otherwise, Yipiao wouldn't have asked for his opinion and would have directly let Yipiao fly out to find food. When Gahan placed Yichong on the stove lid, a miraculous thing happened. Yichong, this little guy, bit on the stove lid, just like a fat cicada nibbling on a watermelon, biting a small hole on the stove lid, this big watermelon skin. This was something that even the Xianyuan sword was unable to shake, but under the teeth of the little guy, Yichong, a hole was bitten open. This was truly a very valiant achievement. Next, Ife went all out and quickly bit through the lid, leaving a hole the size of Ife's body. The lid that had been suppressing the flames in the furnace of heaven and earth had a hole. The flames that had been suppressed for a long time naturally tried to rush out of the hole. Once these flames with a temperature of more than 1,000,000 degrees shot out of the lid like a high-pressure flamethrower, they would probably be able to burn everything around them to ashes. And a part of Gahan's body, which happened to be blocking the hole, would instantly be vaporized, leaving a big hole through his body. But in reality, when these flames touched the hole in the lid, they were happily sucked into Ife's body. These flames seemed to have become Ife's food. With the help of these flames, Ife began to eat the lid more diligently and quickly. About 2 minutes later, Ife actually managed to bite out a hole that was thicker than a thigh. Unfortunately, First Pour seemed to have eaten to his limit. After weakly finishing the last mouthful of the lid, the bottle fell from the lid. Halfway through, it transformed into a scarlet gem, just like Fourth Pour from a month ago. Chapter 769. Before the apocalypse, what was the furthest a baseball pitcher could throw? According to human data, the furthest a baseball could throw was over 300 meters. Gahan's current situation was similar to throwing a baseball. He needed to throw a bottle of Soul Solution through a hole that was about 1 decimeter in diameter to the center of the cauldron of heaven and earth. The distance was about 3 kilometers. Gahan's goal was to break the record of the longest distance thrown by a human by 10 times. Raising the distance by 10 times was fine. With the physique of a famous swordswoman, it was not impossible to achieve such a result. However, this was not the crux of the problem. The crux of the problem was how to throw a small glass bottle onto a Juzi sword that was not much bigger than the glass bottle from a distance of 3 kilometers. This was like shooting a basketball from 3 kilometers away. Even if the energy of 10 Jordans was added to an ordinary person's body, they would not be able to do it. However, Gahan had to do it. Gahan only had one chance. This was because there was only one bottle of soul solution left. If Gahan failed, he would lose the chance to save King Yu. Whoosh! Gahan took a deep breath and took out a metal item from his pocket. He wanted to test it out and see how accurate his aim was. When this metallic object drew a beautiful curve in the air and entered the furnace of heaven and earth, Gahan immediately switched his perspective to Juzi's. Through the blurry light from the furnace of heaven and earth, Gahan saw a burning curve land beside him after a dozen seconds. Then it vanished into nothingness. After estimating the distance, he was about 30 meters away from the Juzi sword. A distance of 3 kilometers was only 30 meters away. Even if Huang Zhong had been reborn, he had nothing to say about this kind of accuracy. This was already an extremely good result. However, no matter how good this result was, it was useless. This was not a competition, it was saving a life. He also had to throw the soul solution accurately onto the Juzi sword. Even if he missed by 3 centimeters, it was meaningless. Let me try again. Gahan moved his sight away from Juzi's body. When he was about to throw a few more metal pieces to practice his aim, Juzi's hurried voice suddenly reached Gahan's ears. Master, Sister Yuang's soul is about to die. At this rate, in at most 20 seconds, Sister Yuang will completely disappear. Juzi's words had already forced Gahan to a dead end. It would take a glass bottle at least 10 seconds to cover a distance of 3 kilometers, just like the metal block from before. In other words, in the remaining 20 seconds, Gahan only had one more chance to throw. Gahan was completely forced to the edge of the cliff. Go! In such a critical moment, Gahan became even more rational. He didn't hesitate or think. He didn't even take a deep breath. He just quickly picked up the soul solution in his hand and threw it into the cauldron of heaven and earth according to his body's best instincts. Gahan couldn't interfere with the rest. The rest was up to fate. At this moment, Gahan suddenly became like a normal person. He didn't dare to look at Juzi again. He just stood there silently, waiting for Juzi to report the final result to him. Success. Master. Juzi's answer was very simple. The soul solution accurately fell onto the Juzi sword. This faint green solution slowly entered the Juzi sword and started to nourish Yu Wang's bean-sized soul. With the help of the soul solution, Yu Wang's soul stopped dissipating at the last moment. Then, it started to gradually condense and finally recovered to the point where she could barely maintain her body. Unfortunately, the soul solution nourished Yu Wang through the Juzi sword. If Yu Wang's soul directly came into contact with the soul solution, then her soul would probably explode to its strongest state. Not bad. Gahan finally relaxed after hearing Juzi's good news. He muttered to himself, although Yu Wang would not be able to reincarnate and become a sword maiden in the real world, at the very least, Yu Wang's soul was saved. But at least King Yu's soul was saved. King Yu still had a chance to wait for the next Zhongyan sword to appear. But this time, fleeting Rena's wedding dress has been made for me. Gahan stared at the depths of the cauldron of heaven and earth. He could faintly see that the sword of destiny that was originally prepared for Yu Wang had now become Fleeting Rena's body, and Fleeting Rena had turned from Yuan Ko into a sword maiden. This was an unexpected ending. At this moment, Gahan could vaguely guess what was going on and the story behind the Fleeting Time family's strange actions, as well as Fleeting Rena's resistance, conflict, pain, and a faint trace of hope. Fleeting Rena must be the daughter of Fleeting Zheng and a certain Yuan Ko. This was not impossible. There have been 3 instances of this happening in history. 2 of them were female sword-bearers and male Yuan Ko, and the other was male sword-bearers and female Yuan Ko. They had miraculously given birth to children of their own. It was not easy to achieve this, and required very complicated conditions. First of all, Yuan Ko had to be a human, or at the very least, a Yuan Ko in human form. It was easy to understand this, as it was impossible for a human and a dog to have children. On the other hand, the human side had to be the sword-bearer. The reason was very simple. Because only the sword-bearer could touch the Yuan Shen's body. Only then could the genitals of both sides truly have sexual relations. Only the white turbid liquid that contained the sword element could allow the seeds of both sides to fuse and mate with each other to become real life. Secondly, the two had to have true feelings for each other, or else they would not be able to give birth to a new life. No one could explain why this was the case, but according to countless historical records, there were many Yuan Shen who had forcefully intercourse with female human sword-bearers after capturing them. But without exception, these female sword-bearers never gave birth to new lives. As for the life that was born, humans did not kill these little lives as they did in most novels. Instead, they protected them and carefully observed their growth. As a result, humans discovered that the 3 lives that were born from humans in Yuan Kou did not combine the characteristics of both sides. Instead, they only showed the characteristics of one side. These 3 children were either humans or Yuan Kou through and through. There were no exceptions. It seemed that the humans were wrong. The children of humans in Yuan Kou did not simply retain the characteristics of one side. Instead, they were split into 2 parts and fused together. It was a combination of soul and body. If the children's bodies belonged to humans, then their souls might belong to Yuan Kou. Just like Fleeting Time Rena, her body belonged to Yuan Kou, but her soul belonged to a human. This was why when her body was completely destroyed by the furnace of heaven and earth, the elemental whirlpool would appear and absorb her body. However, her soul would be left behind, hiding within the furnace. When the time came, she would take away the sword of destiny that had originally belonged to King Yu. This was definitely a scheme planned by the Fleeting family. No one knew where they had learned of Gahan's true plan. They knew that Gahan wanted to reactivate the furnace of heaven and earth and help King Yu regain his body. As the #1 family of the human race, there was no way that the Fleeting family would allow a human and Yuan Kou to fuse together. If news of this were to spread, the Fleeting family's reputation would be destroyed in an instant. As a result, the Fleeting family only had 2 choices. They could either kill Fleeting Time Rena and pretend that she had never existed. They could also think of a way to change Fleeting Time Rena's body and let her become a real human. However, Gahan did not expect the Fleeting family to be even more imaginative than Gahan. They actually wanted Fleeting Time Rena to skip being a human and become sword mistress. When he thought about it carefully, this was a very good deal. Once Fleeting Time Rena became a sword mistress, not only would she gain eternal life, but the Fleeting family would also have an undying fighting force. If he thought about it further, Fleeting Time Rena might just be a test subject for the Fleeting family. The purpose of the test was to find a way to turn a human into a sword mistress. This was because the method could not only be used on a mixed blood like Fleeting Time Rena, but it could also be used on a human. Once this experiment succeeded, the successors of the Lun Yin clan would be able to obtain eternal life through this method when they were about to die. Then, they would be suppressed in the Lun Yin clan forever, protecting the Lun Yin clan for generations to come. It was impossible for the Fleeting family not to see such a huge benefit. As a result, the Fleeting family began to make use of this plan. This was why Fleeting Wooden Fish had so generously given the sovereign blood to Gahan and secretly ordered Fleeting Time Rena to find an opportunity to take over the king of Yu's body. This would allow Gahan to become Fleeting Time Rena's disciple. Of course, there were still some loopholes that Gahan did not understand. For example, if the Fleeting family wanted to carry out this experiment, they could have done it themselves. With the Fleeting family's resources, obtaining the sovereign blood and the body of a sword mistress would be a simple matter. Why do they need to borrow Gahan's hands? The Fleeting family definitely did not want outsiders to know about such a secret and inhumane research. They should have done it themselves. Why do they need to borrow Gahan's hands? Could it be? The Fleeting family's intention to kill Gahan had not disappeared. Chapter 770. Although Nie Yin could roughly guess the reason behind fleeting Rena's actions, it was not of much help to the current situation. The opening of the heaven and earth furnace was destined to fail, although it was not a complete failure. The fleeting family had obtained a complete victory, and Song Hama had managed to save his cloud cast iron. Gahan was the only one who had lost completely. Forget it. Don't think that I'll give up just like that. I'll definitely find a second chance. Gahan touched his suitcase. There was still 7,000 cubic centimeters of sovereign blood in it. This was what Gahan needed to activate the heaven and earth furnace for the second time. As long as the suitcase remained, there was still hope for the King of You to be reborn. Although Gahan still had hope in his heart, it was only for the future. Gahan no longer had any hope for the present. He could only hope that the flames of the heaven and earth furnace would be extinguished as soon as possible so that he could leave this place. Gahan let out a long sigh. He suddenly realized that Zhao Hao was slowly moving towards him. "Stop!" Gahan yelled. "You can't get close to this place." Gahan was right. Zhao Hao could not get close to this place, as he was extremely close to the opening in the lid. Large amounts of hot air were spewing out from the opening. Gahan's body had been strengthened by the famed sword mistress, which was why he was able to stand so close to this place. If Zhao Hao, who was only an ordinary person, tried to get close to this place, he would probably suffer from a severe heat stroke within a few steps. If he was not careful, he might even die. This was why Gahan had to stop Zhao Hao. I know. Zhao Hao smiled sheepishly. He was still a dozen or so meters away from Gahan, but the heat in the air was already too much for him to bear. What a pity! I'm clearly right next to the heaven and earth furnace, and the furnace has already been activated, but I can only stare at it. How great would it be if I could borrow the heaven and earth furnace to forge a sword? Zhao Hao sighed emotionally and gloomily said, "For a mere sword forging grandmaster, witnessing the working process of the worldly cauldron was indeed one of the greatest pursuits in life. If there was anything that could surpass this goal, it would be to forge his own man-made sword maiden. You want to use the furnace of heaven and earth to forge a sword maiden?" Gahan's eyes lit up. He seemed to have thought of something. "Yeah." Zhao Hao nodded weakly. "It's a pity that you didn't tell me about the heaven and earth furnace when you came out. Otherwise, I would have risked my life to return to the lab and bring all my forging tools and materials here. Then I would have personally used the heaven and earth furnace to forge a man-made sword maiden. An artificial sword maiden forged using the furnace of heaven and earth would definitely possess extraordinary energy. A 99% similarity would probably be the lowest. I might be able to forge an innate sword maiden. I will become the #1 grandmaster in the world since ancient times." Speaking up to this point, Zhao Hao couldn't help but feel somewhat proud. However, Zhao Hao was purely delusional. It was true that the furnace of heaven and earth could forge a top-notch man-made sword maiden, but it was impossible to forge an innate sword maiden. Although the furnace of heaven and earth had not been activated many times in history, it had indeed been activated before. During this period of time, there must have been sword-forging grandmasters or even martial grandmasters who wanted to use the furnace of heaven and earth to forge an innate sword maiden. However, history told Gahan that in the past 1,000 years, there had never been a natural sword lady born in the hands of a human swordsmith. Even those grandmasters with terrifying swordsmithing abilities could only forge 99% artificial sword ladies at most. However, when he thought about it from another perspective, it did not seem impossible. What the predecessors could not do did not necessarily mean that the future generations could not do it. If Zhao Hao really succeeded, he might be able to surpass the martial grandmaster level. If that happened, the humans would have to think of a new title for Zhao Hao. A super grandmaster? Or a lightning grandmaster? Although Zhao Hao's words were like a joke in Gahan's mind, he had to admit that Zhao Hao had given Gahan a shocking inspiration. Although the furnace of heaven and earth did not have a body that could be used by Monarch Yu, did Gahan really have to find a ready-made body? Couldn't Gahan forge a temporary body for Monarch Yu? This was the furnace of heaven and earth. With the mystical power of the furnace of heaven and earth, it might really be able to forge a body that could be used by Monarch Yu. It had to be known that the reason why humans had never been able to forge an innate sword maiden was not because they did not have enough swordsmithing skills to forge a body like an innate sword maiden, but because humans could not forge an innate sword maiden soul. Without a soul, an innate sword maiden could not become an innate sword maiden. Now that Guhan had a sword forging grandmaster by his side, as well as such a mystical heaven and earth furnace, it was not impossible for him to forge a perfect sword maiden's body. Sir Grandmaster Tianri, if I prepare enough materials for you, can you start forging an innate sword maiden now? Guhan Yuqi asked Zhao Hao excitedly. No problem. Zhao Hao knew that every sword wielder's dimensional pocket was filled with all sorts of strange items. It was not strange for Guhan's dimensional pocket to contain materials that could be used to forge an innate sword maiden. At this moment, Zhao Hao's mind was filled with the idea of using the furnace of heaven and earth to forge an innate sword maiden, realizing every swordsmithing master's ultimate dream. Even if Guhan offered to sell the materials to Zhao Hao for 10 times or even 100 times the price, Zhao Hao would agree without hesitation. Even if he had to give up all his wealth, he would get the chance to use the furnace of heaven and earth. All right, if I want to forge an innate sword maiden, what materials do I need? Guhan quickly asked Zhao Hao. According to Guhan's experience, the furnace of heaven and earth was about to reach its highest temperature. This also meant that the best time to forge an innate sword maiden was about to arrive. Guhan could not delay for even a second. Of course, I need metal first. Zhao Hao also quickly replied. What kind of metal do you need? Will normal metal do? Guhan immediately took out a huge pile of metal items from his dimensional pocket. Some of them will do, but some won't. Zhao Hao answered decisively after a quick glance at the metal items that Guhan had taken out. Ordinary metals could not be used to forge an innate sword maiden. Zhao Hao first kicked out the normal metals from the pile that Guhan had taken out, leaving only a small amount of rare alloy metals. Only these metals will do. Zhao Hao looked at the remaining alloy metals with a picky expression. However, these metals are still not good enough. It will be difficult to forge an innate sword maiden with them, and they have not been purified. If I purify them, not only will it waste time, but the metal that I purify might not even be enough to forge a dagger. Rare metals. Guhan's head spun furiously, and with a slap, he took out a large pile of metal powder from his dimensional pocket. The pile was as high as a person's waist. Will these alloys do? Guhan asked as he pointed at the pile of gold alloys. Oh my god, where did you get these Emperor alloys? Don't tell me you went to the core room of Yuzhong City's super-dimensional wall protection system. Zhao Hao was very knowledgeable as he recognized that the metal powder that Guhan had taken out was Emperor alloys. In the entire Yuzhong City, only the core room of the super-dimensional wall protection system had Emperor alloys. This was the alloy powder that Misaka Mikoto had dug out from the Emperor alloy used to protect the Emperor Zergs during Guhan's battle in the super-dimensional coin core room. These extremely valuable metal powders were all kept by Guhan into his dimensional pocket. He did not expect that they would shine in this place. It's useful. Of course it's useful. It couldn't be any more useful. Zhao Hao's face was filled with happiness. I can't believe that I can use Emperor alloys to forge an innate sword maiden. I might be able to forge a spiritual sword maiden. The limit of a man-made innate sword maiden was the spiritual sword maiden. Zhao Hao had reached that limit the moment he opened his mouth. What should I do now? Guhan asked. Go in. Throw all the Emperor alloy powder in and smelt it into molten iron to forge an innate sword maiden model. As soon as Zhao Hao finished speaking, he froze. It was as if he had recalled something very important. Did you forget to think about how to forge an innate sword maiden model with these iron powders? Guhan stared into Zhao Hao's eyes as he asked. No, how could I? All right, I admit that I missed this part. Under Guhan's intense gaze, Zhao Hao had no choice but to admit it. The heaven and earth furnace could automatically melt the Emperor alloy powder into molten iron. However, there was no way to forge the molten iron into the shape of a sword. This was a job that had to be done by humans. In the forging room, Zhao Hao could use the tools that were placed in the electric furnace to forge the molten iron into the shape of a sword. However, this was obviously not practical in the heaven and earth furnace. No human could enter the heaven and earth furnace and forge the shape of a sword by hand. It was not easy to see the light at the end of the tunnel, but it seemed to be stuck here. This was no longer a problem that could be solved by humans. Since humans can't solve it, I can only borrow the power of the innate sword maiden. He touched his nose and asked Juzi, Juzi, you're MOD's sword, right? Yes, master. Upon hearing MOD's name, Juzi's voice seemed to fluctuate a little. Then, do you have the ability to forge like MOD? Gohan asked again. Master MOD's forte lies in the creation of mechanisms. He doesn't have a deep understanding of the art of forging. At most, he only knows how to forge swords. Juzi was a little dejected as she answered. That's enough. That's enough. Gohan nodded. Juzi, I'll hand over the appearance of the king of you to you. Chapter 771. To be honest, Juzi's sword did not have any talent for forging swords. At the very least, it could be said that it did not have any talent for shaping the shape of a sword maiden. It was not easy for Gohan to forge a sword maiden after melting the Imperial alloy, and he could not bear to look at it. Was this really a sword? Why did Gohan feel that it was similar to a wooden stick? Furthermore, it looked as if it had been bitten by a dog. It was simply too horrible to look at. Juzi, try forging another shape. Gohan said coldly. Juzi could only knock on the iron sword again. When the shape of the sword appeared again, it looked much better than the previous one. Unfortunately, it was still too horrible to look at. Gohan observed the situation of the furnace of heaven and earth, and found that the flames were burning more and more fiercely. It was gradually turning the entire furnace of heaven and earth white. This was not a good sign, because once the color of the furnace of heaven and earth turned white, it meant that the temperature of the entire furnace of heaven and earth had reached its peak. As the saying went, when things reached their peak, the temperature of the furnace of heaven and earth would start to drop. At that time, there would not be many opportunities for Gohan to forge a new body for the king of heaven and earth. Juzi, I see that your movements are very skilled, and your strength is very uniform. The lines that you have forged are also very good, but why can't you forge a decent sword? Seeing that Juzi had failed for the third time, Gohan could not help but ask. Master, actually, Juzi does not know what to forge. Juzi, who had been speaking in a calm tone, had a hint of grievance in her voice. This was a very rare thing. Master, our MO family's forging is about having a card up your sleeve. Only when you have something in your heart can you have a shape in your hands. Juzi does not know what kind of sword maiden she should forge. Her thoughts are extremely chaotic, so she naturally cannot forge the shape that Master wants. That's simple. Gohan thought for a moment, then said to Juzi, how about this? Just imagine the appearance of a sword in your mind, a sword that you are most familiar with. Then, you can forge it according to this image. The one that I'm most familiar with. Juzi fell into deep thought. After a while, she nodded abruptly and started to reforge. Gohan soon realized that Juzi's forging this time was completely different from the previous 3 times. Although Juzi had been forging continuously for the first 3 times, he had been hammering here and there without any rhythm. It could be seen that Juzi was at a loss. But this time, it was completely different. Juzi's hammering was just right, and the sound of her hammering on the keyboard was sonorous and pleasing to the ear. There were at least 10 white dots of hammering sound every minute, and these hammering sounds were like a sonorous and powerful war song. In less than 10 minutes, Juzi's 4th forging was completed. Through the shared vision of Juzi, Gohan was surprised to see a wide and long golden sword appear in front of him. This sword did not have anything worth boasting about in terms of appearance, nor did it have any unique artistic design. It was just an ordinary sword, but the lines around this sword were just right. The whole body seemed to be cut out by the golden ratio. It seemed that every size was in line with the laws of heaven and earth, making people unable to pick out a single flaw. There was not even a trace of awkwardness, as if all swords in the world should look like this. Why do I have such a familiar feeling when I see this sword? Gohan muttered as he looked at the newly forged sword. Suddenly, a light flashed in his mind. Good heavens, isn't this newly forged sword exactly the same as the Juzi sword? Wasn't this another Juzi sword that was alive and well? Juzi, did you forge this sword according to your own appearance? Gohan immediately asked Juzi. Juzi simply nodded. Master asked me to forge it according to the most familiar appearance in my heart. The most familiar appearance in Juzi's heart is Juzi's appearance. If Master doesn't like Juzi's appearance, Juzi can start over again. Juzi looked particularly wronged when she said this. It seemed that what Gohan hated was not that this sword looked exactly like Juzi, but that he hated the appearance of the Juzi sword. No, just like this. This appearance is very good. There's no need to change it anymore. Gohan said decisively. The reason why he said this was not because he liked the appearance of the Juzi sword, but because there was not much time left in the furnace of heaven and earth. The entire furnace of heaven and earth was about to turn into a vast expanse of white, and there was no time for Juzi to forge a fifth time. Moreover, this was just the appearance of a sword. As long as it had the appearance of a sword, it was fine. As for whether it clashed with other sword maidens, that was not something that Gohan cared about. Anyway, Gohan did not care about this. Lord Tianri, the body of the sword inside has been forged. Can I let King Yu's soul enter now? Although Gohan had a cold expression when he asked this question, Zhao Hao could hear the urgency in Gohan's words. No, it's not time yet. There's still a very crucial step missing. Zhao Hao shook his head and continued. A sword forged from a large amount of the same metal is just an ordinary sword. It cannot become a man-made sword maiden, because this sword lacks a heart. If a person doesn't have a heart, then they naturally can't live. If a sword maiden doesn't have a heart, then it's just an ordinary sword. Then how do we make this ordinary sword have a heart? Gohan followed up and asked. Naturally, you have to forge a heart for it. Zhao Hao stroked his beard. Then you have to find a material that surpasses the sword's body and embed this material into the sword's body. This sword needs to have a heart. For example, if the sword body is forged from iron, then it needs to be forged from silver and embed into the sword's body. If it's forged from silver, then it needs to be forged from gold and embed into the sword body. For the sword's body of gold, it needs to be forged from diamonds and so on and so forth. It's more or less like this. However, what I just said is only the simplest way to choose a heart. There are many sword maidens that are forged from composite alloy materials. For example, this sword is forged from a super alloy like Imperial Alloy. This way, it will be more troublesome to find a new material that surpasses the nature of the alloy to forge the sword maiden's heart. Every alloy needs to be tested in detail to determine the most suitable heart for that alloy. However, after over 900 years of painstaking research by our Swordsmith Association, we finally made a detailed list of the materials that could be used to forge the heart of each alloy. These are all recorded on that list. Grandmaster Tianri, time is of the essence right now. I don't have the time to listen to your detailed explanation. Just tell me what material I should use to forge the heart of this sword. If not for Gohan's forceful interruption, Zhao Hao would probably have gone on for a few more hours. I don't know either. Zhao Hao spread his hands and said something that almost made Gohan vomit blood. Didn't you say you have a list? You can take out that list and check it. Gohan's expression grew colder as he spoke. Firstly, I didn't bring this list with me. You should know that you knocked me out in the laboratory and didn't even give me a word of warning. Us blacksmiths aren't like you swordsmen who can use dimensional pockets. So naturally, I didn't have time to bring anything and left it in the laboratory. Zhao Hao continued to ramble on. Secondly, it's useless even if I brought that list. Imperial Alloy is the strongest alloy in the world. It was synthesized by GND using a method that only GND can use. It's specially used to protect the core of the dimensional wall. No blacksmith has ever dared to use Imperial Alloy to forge an artificial sword mistress for such a precious material. Naturally, the list wouldn't have any record of it. Thirdly, even if someone had the guts to use imperial alloy to forge, I'm guessing they wouldn't have found anything. I've said that Emperor alloy is the strongest alloy in the world. Since it's the strongest, then it's impossible to find a metal that's stronger than it. Without a metal that's stronger than it, it's naturally impossible to forge the heart of this sword. Grandmaster Tianri spoke so much, but to put it bluntly, there was only one thing he meant. Imperial alloy is too strong. He simply can't find a material that can make the heart of this sword. When an ordinary person heard this news, they would definitely fall into a state of intense despair, because this wasn't a problem that could be solved by luck or skill. It truly required a material that was stronger than imperial alloy. This alloy that Jiandi had researched was already the strongest alloy on Earth in theory. If Gohan had painstakingly researched for a few decades after becoming Jiandi, he might have been able to develop an alloy that was even stronger than imperial alloy. But now, he couldn't even think about it. It was Zhao Hao's fault for not finishing his words. From the start, he didn't even mention that the sword mistress needed a heart. Gohan originally had good intentions. In order to give King Yu the strongest body, he had chosen the strongest metal, imperial alloy. But in the end, he had fallen into a trap of his own making and forced himself into a desperate situation. Now, unless a meteorite fell from the sky, and this meteorite happened to contain a metal that was stronger than imperial alloy from the universe, there was only a sliver of a chance of success. Wait, a meteorite falling from the sky? Gohan suddenly thought of something. He took out a box from his dimensional pocket and placed it in front of Zhao Hao. He then opened the box, revealing a long white object. Grandmaster Tianri, do you think this white dwarf fragment can become King Yu's heart? Chapter 772. Zhao Hao had lived to the age of 60. He considered himself to be an experienced and knowledgeable person. However, Zhao Hao had never seen a white dwarf, something that only existed in the cold-blooded writings on astronomy. Therefore, when Gohan repeatedly told Zhao Hao that the long white object in the box was a white dwarf star fragment, even Zhao Hao was at a loss. He did not know if the compressed fragment of a dead star could become the heart of a sword mistress. A white dwarf star fragment is the product of a star being compressed to the extreme. The star itself is made up of various gases and some metallic elements. These gaseous and metallic elements are all compressed together by extreme pressure. It should be a substance made up of carbon, hydrogen. Nitrogen is the most common gas in the air, oxygen, iron, and almost all the trace elements in the periodic table of elements. The later the periodic table of elements has a shorter lifespan. In the end, it will not be compressed, and the last few elements are man-made. If you say it is a metal, it should not have the characteristics of a metal. If you say it is not a metal, it does contain various metallic elements. Zhao Hao scratched his scalp and pulled his beard. He pulled dozens of strands. This question almost made Zhao Hao's brain explode. However, after 5 minutes, Zhao Hao still did not give Gohan a definite answer. At this time, the color of the furnace of heaven and earth had turned completely white. Not long after, the furnace of heaven and earth would weaken and start the process of extinguishing. Whatever, I can't go wrong after trying. Gohan touched the white dwarf star key. Gohan knew that this white dwarf star key was extremely rare. It was originally a container to store precious sage seeds. Although the sage seeds inside had been used to repair Yuan-Tu Avicii, this white dwarf star key still had its own ability as a key. It was the only tool to open the warm home of Gohan and I Ching. Once this key was integrated into Yu Wangxin's body, then Gohan would not be able to open the home that Gohan missed and could not forget in the near future. King Yu, Gohan muttered to himself. Then, he threw the white dwarf key into the hole without hesitation. The white dwarf key was extremely heavy. Gohan had to squeeze out every ounce of strength in his body to throw the white dwarf key beside Yu Wangxin, who was being forged inside the furnace. At the same time, Gohan immediately switched to Juzi's view and ordered Juzi to place the white dwarf key into Yu Wangxin's body. The moment the white dwarf key came into contact with the golden sword, it was as if the white dwarf key had fallen into a swamp. It silently entered the golden sword without any sound or light. However, Guhan could clearly feel that when the white dwarf key and the golden sword fused into one, the golden sword had instantly become different. There was suddenly an aura that seemed to be able to oppress the masses, telling everyone who saw her that she was the ruler of the world. Lord Guhan, what's the situation inside? Did you succeed? Zhao Hao asked Guhan nervously and curiously. If he succeeded, then he could solemnly add a line to the table that had been researched by predecessors for 900 years. He could tell everyone that Emperor Alloy could be forged using white dwarfs. This was a huge discovery. It was enough for Zhao Hao to leave his name in the history of swordsmiths forever. In the future, all new swordsmiths would definitely remember that it was he, Zhao Hao, who made this shocking discovery when they studied the table. It should be a success, Guhan replied with uncertainty. He then asked, "Can Yu Wangxin's soul enter now?" "Oh, there's another condition." Guhan's guess was right. Zhao Hao still did not make things clear. Thus, Guhan said coldly, "What other conditions do you have? Tell me clearly at once. I don't want to ask anymore." My mistake. Zhao Hao stroked his beard symbolically. He did not have the slightest bit of sincerity to admit his mistake. There are still 2 steps left. One is to grind a dimensional crystal stone of Earl grade and above into powder and sprinkle it evenly on the sword. This way, the metal will be able to supply the sword essence to the Sword Maiden. The powder of the dimensional crystal stone will be like the Sword Maiden's blood. The factor that determines the grade of a man-made Sword Maiden is the dimensional crystal stone. If you want to make a spiritual sword-grade Sword Maiden, besides imitating the original forging material of a natural Sword Maiden, you will also need to sprinkle the dimensional crystal stone powder on the body of the artificial Sword Maiden. An artificial spiritual sword-grade Sword Maiden requires at least a king-grade dimensional crystal stone. So on and so forth. The immortal sword grade requires an emperor grade, and the emperor grade requires. Alright, I don't know what kind either. In addition, the forging materials of the immortal sword grade and the emperor grade contain some things that only exist in myths and legends. For example, the Xianming sword uses Zhu Wu Xianming's pubic bone. The Heavenly Gathering Cloud sword uses the cartilage of the Yamada no Orochi, and the Xianyuan sword is said to be forged using some post-celestial 5 elements treasure, as well as the black-yellow merit chi. These materials that have never been heard of, humans are simply unable to imitate them. That's why we swordsmiths can imitate the man-made immortal sword-grade Sword Maiden and the man-made emperor-grade Sword Maiden. Otherwise, we humans would have many more powerful sword-bearers, and those pitiful spirit sword-bearers wouldn't have to be stuck at the spirit sword realm for their entire lives, unable to advance any further. Zhao Hao said with a sigh. Unfortunately, the latter half of his words were meaningless to Guhan. Guhan only needed to know that Yu Wangxin's body needed a high-quality dimensional crystal stone. That's easy. Guhan took out the last Duke Seed dimensional crystal stone he had from his dimensional pocket. He was prepared to throw it into the heaven and earth furnace once again as the blood for Yu Wangxin's new body. According to Zhao Hao, this Duke Seed was a precious dimensional crystal stone that could be used to forge a spirit sword-grade Sword Maiden. Using it on Yu Wangxin's famed sword-grade body was simply using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. Using a Duke Seed was enough. However, Guhan wasn't stingy at all. He had already thrown in such a precious white dwarf star key. So why would he care about a mere Duke Seed? However, before Guhan could throw out the Duke Seed, he was stopped by Zhao Hao. Lord Guhan, I haven't finished speaking. Why are you in such a hurry to waste the dimensional crystal stone? Emperor Alloy is originally a super metal forged by Jiandi using all the magical metals in the world. He infused Jiandi's power into it and mixed it with at least 10 Duke Seed dimensional crystal powder. Emperor Alloy already contains a large amount of dimensional crystal powder. You don't even need to send in any dimensional crystal stone. This step has already been completed. We can skip it. Guhan really wanted to beat this guy who only spoke halfway. He silently put the Duke's seed back into his dimensional pocket and waited for Zhao Hao to explain the last step. Actually, this last step is not essential. However, if we have the materials, we can give this man-made sword maiden an even more magical power. Zhao Hao paused for a moment. The Yuan Zhen, who are known as divine spirits, all have their own godhood within their bodies. Forcefully digging out the godhood within these Yuan Zhen's bodies and then fusing it into the artificial sword maiden's body will allow the sword maiden to possess an extremely mystical power. What power? Gohan was stunned for a moment and immediately asked. The power of a god. The power of faith. At this point, Zhao Hao's eyes revealed an intoxicated light. Godhood is the symbol of a god's power. It is a tool to absorb the faith of humans. Every godhood corresponds to a godhood. The god of death's godhood corresponds to death. The god of wisdom's godhood corresponds to wisdom. Some powerful main gods' godhoods can correspond to multiple godhoods at the same time. For example, Athena's godhood corresponds to the 5 godhoods of wisdom, war, power, beauty, and virginity. If such a godhood is fused into the man-made sword maiden's body, the sword maiden will also inherit the godhood contained in the godhood and have the power to control this godhood. Almost all Yuan co-gods value their godhood very much. They would rather die than let their godhood be controlled by others. In human history, there was only one coincidental experience that allowed humans to obtain such a godhood and create such a man-made sword maiden at the same time. She absorbed the godhood of Hathor, the goddess of love and fertility in the Egyptian pantheon. Thus, she obtained the godhood of love and fertility at the same time. One was the ability to make 2 people who did not love each other fall in love quickly. The other was the ability to speed up the growth of crops. These 2 abilities sound very powerful and are very helpful for the survival of humans. However, they're useless in battle. What's more unfortunate is that this godhood of love caused a lot of chaos. At one time, the entire city's upper echelons were about to fight each other because of the green hat on their heads. In the end, the sword bearer was imprisoned forever, and the man-made sword maiden was sealed forever. This was a story that Gohan had never heard of before. It was also a story that was not recorded in any history books. Therefore, Gohan knew nothing about the fact that a godhood could be fused into a man-made sword maiden. However, when he thought about it carefully, it seemed that more than 400 years ago, Berlin Bay City had an incredible harvest for 20 consecutive years. Every year, the grain output was more than 10 times that of the previous year. What was the legend of a dynasty producing 10,000 gene of grain per mu before the Great Destruction? Berlin Bay City had truly achieved an achievement of 100,000 gene of grain per mu. This was an achievement that no one could imagine. However, after 20 years, this legend never appeared again. Berlin Bay City's grain output returned to the average level. By the way, at that time, there was also a minor love scandal in Berlin Bay City. A female sword-bearer at the famed sword tier actually managed to charm 2 male and a female immortal sword tier sword-bearers in Berlin Bay City. It was said that the 3 sword-bearers had a face-to-face negotiation and requested to use a duel to decide who the only lover of the female sword-bearer would be. Then, there was no more. This was just a love scandal that was not paid much attention to. Today, after 400 years, there were only a few words left. Nothing more had been passed down. Speaking of godhood, I have one here. As he spoke, Gohan took out a transparent object from his hand. If the dead Loki could see this scene, he would definitely scream the name of this godhood. Creation Godhood. Chapter 773. Without any hesitation, Gohan threw the creation godhood into the furnace of heaven and earth. Juzi caught the creation godhood. Just like the white dwarf key, it quickly fused into Wang Jiangxin's body. Is a man-made sword lady done just like that? Gohan turned to Zhao Hao and asked. Oh, it's done. Zhao Hao answered absent-mindedly. He kept thinking about the creation godhood that Gohan had thrown into the furnace of heaven and earth. He, who was a little careless, now realized that something was wrong. Guhan did not seem to be the original wielder of the Final Destination sword. This was because Guhan's attention was not on the Final Destination sword, but on the man-made sword lady that had been reforged. Emperor Alloy, White Dwarf Star Fragment, an unknown divinity. Any one of these three items would be a treasure that would shock the entire human world. But Guhan had thrown them all in without holding back, just to forge a man-made sword lady. This was something that Zhao Hao was unable to understand. A man-made sword maiden would only be a spiritual sword tier at best, and any of the three items would be more useful than a spiritual sword maiden. For Guhan to use these treasures in such a manner, it was not enough to describe his behavior. Who is this Guhan? What is his identity? Will I be involved in something terrible? When Zhao Hao thought of this, he felt a faint desire to retreat. He wanted to stay far away from Guhan. But on second thought, Zhao Hao gave up on this idea. This was not the safe Yuzhong city, but the dangerous wilderness. God knew how many Yuan Ko were hiding around here. Although he was a master swordsmith who was equivalent to an immortal sword wielder, when facing a Yuan Ko, he was not even as useful as an ancient sword wielder. If he left hastily, who knew which Yuan Ko would swallow his bones? Besides, as a swordsmith, Zhao Hao was also very curious. He really wanted to know how powerful the artificial sword lady would be if so many rare treasures were used to forge an artificial sword lady. Would it give birth to the world's first immortal sword maiden? At the thought of this, Zhao Hao completely gave up on the idea of escaping. Even if Guhan were to kill him in the next second, he still wanted to witness the birth of this man-made sword maiden with his own eyes. While Zhao Hao was daydreaming at the side, Guhan was staring at the furnace of heaven and earth with lifeless eyes. The reason why his eyes were lifeless was because Guhan's vision was not in his eyes, but in Juzi's eyes. Although countless precious treasures were thrown into King Yu's new body, Guhan helplessly discovered that King Yu's soul was still unable to enter this new body. During the experiment in the instance dungeon, I Ching had clearly told Guhan that King Yu's soul had to wait until the Sword Maiden's body was completely refined into a milky white color before it could enter. Just like the milky white flames around Guhan that were already extremely hot. This was because only after the Sword Maiden's body was refined into a milky white color would it mean that the entire Sword Maiden was in a completely open state. Only in this state could King Yu's soul completely control every corner of the new body. Otherwise, King Yu would become a cripple. He would either be deaf, or have his limbs broken. Either way, this was not what King Yu and Guhan wanted to see. Around the orange, in the middle of the fire, the cloud-cast iron and Zhongyan sword had already turned milky white, just like the solidified milk on the ground. This meant that their bodies were completely open, and their souls could completely fuse with their bodies. Only King Yu's new body was still golden, and showed no signs of turning milky white. I understand. Guhan bit his lips. Imperial Alloy, White Dwarf Star Fragment, and Creation Divinity. With these three unparalleled materials combined, the material of this sword has probably reached the level of an immortal sword or even an emperor's sword. The furnace of heaven and earth's temperature might be able to melt a famed sword maiden, but it can't turn this sword into a milky white color. We need to raise the temperature of the furnace of heaven and earth. Guhan looked at the flames of the furnace of heaven and earth, and discovered that the milky white flames had once again turned faint red. This was a sign that the furnace of heaven and earth was starting to weaken. Guhan had to think of a way to raise the temperature of the furnace of heaven and earth again, and gather more firepower to turn this sword made of all sorts of top-notch materials into a milky white color. Phew! Guhan's vision returned to his body, and he quickly took out the leather case that contained the sovereign blood from his dimensional pocket. Guhan had previously used a total of 4,000 cubic centimeters of sovereign blood to activate the furnace of heaven and earth. This was more than enough to refine an ancient sword maiden. According to I Ching, 4,000 cubic centimeters was enough even for a spirit sword maiden. In other words, when I Ching repaired the Emperor's sword in the instance dungeon, he used 6,000 cubic centimeters of sovereign blood. At this moment, there was exactly 6,000 cubic centimeters of sovereign blood left in the leather case. If Yu Wangxin's body was the body of an emperor's sword, then he would need to put another 2,000 cubic centimeters of sovereign blood into the furnace of heaven and earth. Gohan did not even blink as he took out the 2,000 cubic centimeters of sovereign blood from the leather case, and then smashed them into the center of the furnace of heaven and earth. The test tubes that contained the golden blood exploded on the walls of the furnace, and the golden blood quickly seeped into the walls of the furnace. The milky white flames in the furnace of heaven and earth, which had already weakened a little, instantly turned crimson red. What's going on? Why did it go from milky white to crimson red? Could it be that the sovereign blood had a positive effect, and it caused the temperature of the furnace of heaven and earth to drop? Gohan thought to himself nervously. In the method that I Ching had told Gohan to use the furnace of heaven and earth, the sovereign blood could only be used before the furnace of heaven and earth was activated. She had never told Gohan what would happen if he used the sovereign blood again when the furnace of heaven and earth was activated. Perhaps it really would have a negative effect. A trace of worry flashed in Gohan's eyes, but soon, Juzi reported to Gohan that the temperature of the furnace of heaven and earth did not drop. Instead, it started to rise, and it was heading towards 10 million degrees Celsius. Gohan let out a sigh of relief. It seemed like the sovereign blood did not have a negative effect. The flames in the furnace of heaven and earth had turned from milky white to crimson red because its temperature had increased. Only when the temperature reached the upper limit would the flames become milky white again. Time passed. After approximately 20 minutes, the flames in the cauldron of heaven and earth turned milky white once again. According to Juzi's report, the flames in the cauldron of heaven and earth should be around 13 million degrees Celsius. The color of the new sword lady's body finally started to change. The golden color gradually faded, and milky white spots started to form on the sword body. However, when the flames in the furnace of heaven and earth turned completely milky white again, these spots were just spots. The new sword mistress body was still mostly yellow. Could this sword's body have already surpassed the Emperor's sword's body? Gohan thought in disbelief. Could there be a sword mistress that surpassed the Emperor's sword's body in this world? No. This should be the effect of the creation godhead. Because the creation godhead is an existence that surpasses the Emperor's swords. If I want the creation godhead to merge with the body, I have to use a temperature that surpasses the Emperor's swords. Gohan gritted his teeth and took out 2,000 cubic centimeters of sovereign blood from his suitcase. He threw all of it into the furnace of heaven and earth. Just like that, Gohan had thrown 8,000 cubic centimeters of sovereign blood into the furnace of heaven and earth. This had already created a record. It was the highest single use of sovereign blood in the furnace of heaven and earth in the past 1,000 years. Because the Emperor's sword's sword mistress only needed 6,000 cubic centimeters, it was meaningless to throw 8,000 cubic centimeters into it. The furnace of heaven and earth once again changed. The milky white became crimson red, and the temperature continued to rise. In the end, when it became milky white again, the temperature in the furnace of heaven and earth exceeded 40 million degrees and reached a terrifying 43 million degrees. Only a sword mistress like Juzi could stay in there. If Gohan's body went in less than 0.0001 second, Gohan would be vaporized. At the same time, Juzi also sent good news. The golden sword was no longer golden. Instead, it had become a faint white that was similar to brownish white. Although it was still a distance away from milky white, it seemed that King Yu's soul could go in. Now, King Yu's control over his body could reach above 95%. There shouldn't be any obvious disability. It was just like a patient with a weak body. His body would have some symptoms like a fever or a cold from time to time, but this was already within the range of Gohan's tolerance. But could he really let King Yu in like that? Could it be that he didn't have any more sovereign blood? Gohan once again opened his suitcase and unhesitatingly grabbed 20 test tubes and threw them in. Just like that, Gahan had thrown more than 10,000 cubic centimeters into the furnace of heaven and earth. This was a number that could cause a qualitative change. The furnace of heaven and earth's flames instantly started to spin. Through the transparent lid, one could see that the flames seemed to have formed a massive tornado that rampaged through the entire furnace of heaven and earth. At the center of the tornado was where Juzi was. That place was extremely peaceful, and compared to the raging fire tornado, that place was like a peaceful heaven. "Master, this is bad, Master," Juzi suddenly reported to Gahan. "The temperature at the center of the tornado has instantly disappeared. The temperature around me has dropped to 0 degrees. Big Sister King Yu's body is quickly turning golden." Gahan did not say anything and directly shared Juzi's vision. It was just as Juzi had reported. At the center of the tornado, there was a space that was less than 10 square meters. The temperature of the tornado itself was over 80 million degrees Celsius, but the temperature at the center of the tornado was exactly 0 degrees Celsius. The two completely different temperatures coexisted in harmony here. If it wasn't for the fact that this concerned King Yu's rebirth, Gahan would have praised this as the most miraculous scene in the world. "Master, what should we do now? Do you want me to take this sword to the flaming tornado?" Juzi suggested. This was a good idea. Since it was 0 degrees Celsius, they could put the sword somewhere that was not 0 degrees Celsius. "No, let's wait a bit longer. I have a feeling that only here can King Yu be reborn." Facing this terrible situation, Gahan suddenly said calmly. Chapter 774. What was the extreme of flames? Many people might have asked this question before. Before today, if someone had asked Gahan this question, Gahan would have refused to answer it because he didn't know the answer and didn't want to mislead anyone. However, if someone asked Gahan this question now, Gahan would definitely answer that person. The extreme of flames was water. This was what Gahan saw with his own eyes. After the flame tornado spun for a few minutes, it suddenly started to rain in the eye of the tornado. Droplets of rain fell from the sky and landed all around Juzi. The rain seemed very ordinary, and there was nothing special about it. However, when one of the drops landed on Juzi's body, Juzi, who didn't have any reaction to the 40 million degree heat, suddenly jumped up from the ground as if she had been bitten by a poisonous snake. Gahan, who was sharing his vision with Juzi, quickly followed Juzi's line of sight and looked at Juzi's shoulder. That was where the drop of water had landed. At this time, the shoulder had become a charred black, and black smoke was constantly coming out of the spot where the drop of water had landed. Juzi was actually burned. Gahan was shocked. Juzi's body was made of fusong wood, which was used by golden crows to rest on. It was a tree that could withstand the sun's temperature of 1 billion degrees. In other words, a temperature of at least 1 billion degrees was needed to harm Juzi's body. Could it be that the temperature of the drop of water had exceeded 1 billion degrees? At this time, there weren't many raindrops falling from the sky. There were less than 20 drops in 2s and 3s. Except for one drop that landed on Juzi's body, the rest all dripped on the ground and not on the other sword maidens. "Oh no! Hurry up and send the Cast Cloud Iron and the others away. Throw them into the flame tornado. We can't stay here anymore." Gahan immediately ordered Juzi. If Juzi's body couldn't withstand the temperature, who knew what would happen to the sword maidens if a drop of water fell on them? Therefore, under Gahan's order, Cast Cloud Iron and the Sword of Destiny were thrown out of the eye of the tornado, leaving only the man-made Sword of Destiny and the golden sword hidden in the eye of the storm. "Master, should we throw away the Sword of Destiny?" Juzi asked Gahan after some hesitation. "No need." Gahan answered without hesitation. This Rina Takasaka had it worse. Gahan didn't want to be a good person anymore, so he let her be. As a result, only Juzi, the golden sword, and Rina Takasaka's Sword of Destiny were left in the eye of the storm. The rain fell faster and faster, and there were more and more drops. In the end, it turned into a light rain. The 3 sword maidens were not spared, and were showered by the rainwater that was over 1 billion degrees. Juzi had it worse. Smoke rose from all parts of her body, as if someone had set off firecrackers on her. Rina Takasaka's Sword of Destiny had better luck. She had the golden sword on top of her, so the golden sword was able to withstand the rain. As for the golden sword, what Guhan rejoiced about was that when the golden sword received the first drop of rain, it was as if it had undergone a whitening operation. It instantly became snow white, and as it received more and more rain, it finally became a milky white color. After consuming 10,000 cubic centimeters of Guhan's sovereign blood, King Yu's new body finally glowed with a new life force, becoming a body suitable for King Yu's soul to enter. King of Yu. After ignoring the King of Yu for more than an hour, Guhan finally spoke to her. The King of Yu softly replied. It seemed that her soul had finally awakened. I don't want to say anything more. It's raining outside, and if you touch a single drop of rain, your soul will immediately scatter. So, after you leave Juzi's body, you can't hesitate at all. You must immediately fly into your new body, and then we'll be able to lean on each other in the real world. Guhan spoke as calmly as he could. This sword needs 10,000 cubic centimeters of sovereign blood to enter the milky white state, and it's also used up 3 precious materials. I feel that after this sword is forged, it'll become at least a celestial grade sword maiden. It might even become a brand new Emperor's sword. It'll be much better than your original body, so you can get rid of the knot in your heart. King Yu acknowledged and paused. He thought of something and suddenly asked, if this body can really become a celestial sword or even an Emperor's sword, then before you become a celestial sword wielder or even an Emperor's sword wielder, will I never be able to see you again? The King of Yu's question caused Guhan to sink into silence. The King of Yu was right. If this body was really a celestial or Emperor sword wielder, then before Gu Hansheng became a sword wielder of the same level, before Guhan had the ability to synchronize with her again, they would never be able to see each other again. This isn't the worst-case scenario. The King of Yu gradually became excited. What if you can't become a celestial or Emperor sword wielder? Do you think celestial or Emperor sword wielder is as simple as eating, drinking, and sleeping? How many geniuses have died in front of this stage? Also, what if you can't synchronize with my brand new body? The Yu King became more agitated as he spoke. No, I still can't enter this body. Forget it, I don't want this body anymore. I just want to stay in Zhu Zi's body. That way, I can accompany you every day and talk to you. That's enough for me. It's enough. I don't want this body. I give up. I give up. The King of Yu's worry was not abnormal. She was even speaking the truth. Her worry could very well happen. Once Guhan and the new King of Yu couldn't synchronize, this meant that after King of Yu's soul entered the new body, he would fall into an eternal slumber. Only God knew if the next person to wake King of Yu up would be Guhan or another sword wielder. Even Guhan estimated that the chance of it not being him was around 50%. Don't worry, I Ching taught me a way. You'll definitely be able to see me immediately, Guhan said gently and firmly. But in reality, this was a complete lie. I Ching had only told Guhan to find an ancient sword rank body. He hadn't said anything about forging a celestial or Emperor sword rank body. This was all nonsense from Guhan. Really? King of Yu asked in disbelief. It's true, Guhan nodded and then said to Juzi, now, immediately, chase King of Yu's soul out. King of Yu, you can't hesitate. Luckily, King of Yu's soul didn't act foolishly again. Her soul entered the new body in the blink of an eye. Not a single drop of sun rain landed on King of Yu's soul. After this milky white sword absorbed King of Yu's soul, it released a blinding light. Suddenly, there was a layer of flowing light on the surface of her body. This showed that she had a new life and had become a true sword lady. I finally succeeded. Guhan looked at the sky. The rain was starting to lessen. This meant that the heaven and earth furnace's high tide was about to end. This meant that the heaven and earth furnace's opening was about to end. King of Yu, I wonder if we'll be able to meet again. Guhan looked at King of Yu through Juzi's eyes with infinite gentleness. He was at a loss. If King of Yu really became a celestial or even Emperor sword rank sword lady, Would he be able to meet King of Yu again? This was an answer that no one knew. You won't be able to see her. No one could give Gahan an answer, but that didn't mean that no sword lady could give Gahan an answer. The voice that answered Gahan came from Gahan's hand. Outside the heaven and earth furnace, a sharp and mocking voice said to Gahan, "Xian Yuan, it's you?" Gahan immediately recognized who this familiar person was. Who else could it be other than the strongest emperor's sword, the Xian Yuan sword, whose personality was unpredictable and who liked to draw sh*t. It's me. You're too useless. How many days has it been? If not for the heaven and earth furnace's overflowing energy, I'll never wake up. Xian Yuan's sword said unhappily, "What are you standing there for? Can't you see that the heaven and earth furnace is about to weaken? Hurry up and respectfully send me into the heaven and earth furnace to absorb some heaven and earth energy. Otherwise, I'm going to sleep again." "Wait, tell me first. What did you mean just now? What do you mean I won't be able to see King of Yu again?" Gahan immediately asked. Xian Yuan's sword definitely had her reasons for saying that. Gahan didn't want to never see King of Yu again. "You don't even know that?" Xian Yuan's sword said disdainfully. "Why do you think humans after the apocalypse can't forge natural sword ladies? Why do you think you can coordinate with sword ladies?" "Why?" Gahan really didn't know. "Because you humans are no longer true humans." Xian Yuan's sword's voice grew sharper, filled with mockery and sorrow. "It's a pity that I, Nuwa, fought against the great Tao, the heavenly Tao, the demon race, the Wu people, and all living things of the great wilderness for 30,000 years before defeating the Flame Emperor and killing Qi Yu, establishing the glorious era of the human race. Now, we've completely perished. There's not even a single true human left under the heavens." Xian Yuan's sword, "What do you mean? Can you explain?" Gahan frowned. He had a bad premonition. "Let me ask you, did humans before the apocalypse have something like sword essence? Did sword ladies exist in the world before the apocalypse?" Xian Yuan's sword questioned Gahan. "Probably not." Gahan thought about it. "That's right. You humans are no longer pure. Although you aren't Yuan Ko, you aren't pure humans either. Therefore, in the hands of you impure humans, you can forget about forging natural sword ladies." Xian Yuan's sword's words were filled with sorrow. However, it revealed the greatest secret of this world. Chapter 775. Helpless, Gahan could only put the Xian Yuan sword back into his dimensional pocket. In the end, he turned his gaze to the remaining two swords, especially the golden Juzi sword. After fusing with King Yu's soul, did she become a real sword maiden? If she succeeded, what level of sword maiden would she be? How many years would he have to wait before he could meet King Yu again? Gahan reached behind him and pulled Juzi in front of him. When the faces of the two sword maidens appeared in his sight, Gahan was surprised to find that there were actually two Juzi in this world. That's impossible, unless that man practiced the 9 swords of mysterious heaven. Otherwise, it's impossible. Xian Yuan's sword's words got stuck at this point, and then he suddenly realized something. "I remember, didn't you practice the 9 swords of mysterious heaven? Don't tell me that man is." Then he saw the pitch-black Juzi sword. Gahan's hand touched the hilt of the Juzi sword, and the Juzi sword became Juzi. It held Gahan's arm and called out loyally with a hint of heartache, "Master, 200 cubic centimeters. For 100 cubic centimeters. 1,000 cubic centimeters. 2,000 cubic centimeters. For 1,000 cubic centimeters." In 3 seconds, the last drop of blood in Gahan's body was sucked dry. His entire body was as dry as a mummy. When he was about to die in less than 10 seconds, the Xian Yuan sword finally flew out of Gahan's body and quickly flew into the cauldron of heaven and earth through the hole in the lid, disappearing into a crazily spinning tornado. It was sucked away. It was sucked away by the skin of that thing. Gahan answered as calmly as possible. "It's the cloud cast." Seeing this face, Gahan was also very happy. It was for the revival of the cloud cast and for his good friend's true recovery. 2 of the swords still maintained their original appearance. The golden Juzi sword rested on top of the sword of destiny that contained Rina Takasaka's soul, and beside the golden Juzi sword lay the golden Xianyuan sword. Speaking of which, where did so many golden swords come from? Why did the style of a Xianyuan sword change in an instant? Just a moment ago, great Emperor Xianyuan was leading the human race through all obstacles and worrying about the country and its people. Why did he suddenly seem to have turned into an arrow fanatic? Xianyuan? Gohan picked up the Xianyuan sword again and called out its name weakly. However, the Xianyuan sword did not answer Gohan. It seemed to have fallen asleep again. Listening to the Xianyuan sword's narration, Gohan vaguely realized that he might be close to the world's greatest secret. I understand. It must be because Juzi made King Yu's body look exactly like her. So the newborn King Yu has the same face as Juzi. Gohan pinched Yu Wang's face and looked at her naked body. He could only helplessly say, "Juzi, it seems that you have a twin sister." "Master? What do you mean by a prank?" Juzi's voice suddenly sounded from behind Gohan. Gohan turned his head and saw Juzi looking at him with a pair of confused eyes. She did not seem to understand what a prank meant. What if that blood essence was absorbed by someone? Gohan recalled the scene of that day and the wonderful moment when Long Xiaoya was under his body under Wen Meiyun's guidance. Gohan could not help but recall the strange ending at the last moment. Yo, I didn't expect that guy's bloodline to still exist. The Xianyuan sword pondered for a moment. Was that person a man or a woman? Gohan, who had just woken up, immediately jumped out of the medical pod. The first thing he saw was Song Hama's concerned face. However, Song Hama was not alone. Beside Song Hama's face, there was another face that he had not seen in a long time, leaning against Song Hama's. What do you mean? What do you mean by the blood essence was absorbed by someone? The Xianyuan sword paused and asked in disbelief. Gohan shook his head without hesitation. There was no pain in this world that could compare to the pain caused by the sword lady's deep sword mark. If one could even endure this kind of pain, then other pain was nothing at all. With that, Gohan ignored this guy and turned his gaze to the furnace of heaven and earth. This feeling is... A hint of excitement appeared on Gohan's face. With a slight thought, the golden Juzi sword in his hand radiated a brilliant light. Finally, it turned into the body of a petite girl. She was naked and had her eyes closed, quietly being held in Gohan's arms. You're really lucky. It's rare to find a woman in 10, and you actually met her. The Xianyuan sword's voice sounded a little disappointed. Is she still a virgin? The world has already entered the wrong path. Everything about you has been contaminated by the sword essence. Only a true human can complete the final step of being a natural sword lady. The Xianyuan sword's words sounded like a dull bell, ringing in Gohan's heart. No, Gohan answered quickly. Wait, if Juzi is behind me, then the person in my arms is, even I can't do anything about it. The Xianyuan sword's voice sounded excited again. The Xianyuan sword's voice seemed to become excited again. Let me tell you, if this sword lady forged after the great calamity truly wants to become a sword lady, she must use the essence of a pure-blooded human. Why are you so lucky? The Xianyuan sword seemed to spit. Then let me ask you again, are you afraid of pain? You're the F***King SM. Gohan gave Song Hama a punch. Go play with your cloud cast iron. It's me. I sucked her virgin blood essence. Gohan admitted straightforwardly. Just as he said this, the Xianyuan sword automatically flew up from Gohan's hand and pierced straight into Gohan's heart. The tip of the sword directly pierced into the heart and stuck to the heart. Like a vampire, it began to crazily absorb the blood in Gohan's body. On the other side, Song Hama, who discovered that Gohan had inexplicably turned into a mummy, immediately followed Gohan's instructions and sent Gohan directly into the medical pod. Not sister. Juzi, who was standing, shook her head. She's my daughter, because she was created by Juzi herself. Fine. King, you should at least be a spirit sword level sword maiden. I will definitely use the fastest speed to become a spirit sword level sword wielder. Gohan secretly said in his heart. Then, He gently and carefully picked up this golden Juzi sword. When he was about to hide it in his dimensional pocket, Guhan suddenly felt a familiar throbbing from the depths of this sword. This man's vital energy is the most useless. When he reaches an age, even if he doesn't eject it, it will still overflow. Once the first vital energy in his life is ejected, then this man's vital energy is useless. Women are good. The vital energy is attached to that layer of membrane. With a gentle tub, the freshest vital energy will mix with blood and flow out. Only 10 drops of this kind of blood will be needed to wash away the impurities in the Sword Maiden's body and complete the last step. Although what the Xianyuan sword said seemed to be serious, why did it sound to Guhan that the Xianyuan sword seemed to be enjoying it? The focus was completely on something else. It's a pity. If that descendant with the surname Long was still a virgin, I would only need to poke her with my finger, and I would be able to witness the birth of the first natural-born Sword Maiden after the apocalypse. The more the Xianyuan sword spoke, the more excited it became. It spoke as if she had her own body, even though she was clearly not synchronized. Guhan's voice became sluggish. That's right, her surname is Long. At this time, the furnace of heaven and earth had returned to its original appearance. It had once again turned into a desert-like sandy land. The huge flame whirlwind from before had long disappeared. It was as if nothing had happened here. Thank you. Guhan's hand touched Juzi's forehead. Then, with the help of Juzi, he came to the side of the last 3 swords. TSK, TSK. Then I'll help you today. Hurry up and prepare that medical cabin of yours. Otherwise, I won't care if you die. As soon as the Xianyuan sword finished speaking, Guhan immediately took out his medical cabin from his dimensional pocket. He also instructed the confused Song Hama to immediately send his body into the medical cabin if anything happened to his body. Guhan immediately turned his head to look at his arms. It was clearly a living Juzi lying in his arms. Fortunately, Guhan's medical cabin was powerful enough. All sorts of precious medical resources were poured into Guhan's body. First, they maintained the functions of Guhan's various organs. Then, they began to rapidly restore the blood in Guhan's body. It wasn't until 3 to 4 hours later that Guhan slowly woke up from the medical cabin. No matter what, I must bring the Yu King back to life. Guhan took a deep breath. If it's true that most humans have been contaminated, I know that there's at least one person who still has pure human blood. All right, this is going to be a complete mess. Is that so? There's such a person? The Xianyuan sword raised its voice. Don't tell me the person you're talking about has the surname Long. Master? Why are you holding Juzi in your arms? But Juzi can't feel Master's warmth. Juzi finally saw the appearance of the Sword Maiden in Guhan's arms and asked curiously. A woman. Guhan replied. Sour Popsicle, you're finally awake. Song Hama's face bloomed into a smile. I say, have you fallen in love with something interesting recently? When did you fall in love with SM? And you even want to stab yourself with a sword? Hui Yuhao dragged his still slightly weak legs towards the center of the furnace of heaven and earth. There were 5 sword maidens scattered around. The first thing he saw was the natural sword maiden, the Zhongdian sword. Guhan directly put the natural sword maiden into his dimensional pocket. Yu King. Guhan was just about to call out Yu King's name, but his lips couldn't help but tremble. He said unhappily, Juzi, now is not the time to play pranks on me. Chapter 776. To sum up King Yu's current situation, first of all, King Yu had completely turned into Juzi after rebirth. However, the reason had already been found. It was because Juzi wanted to save trouble and created the tragedy of King Yu based on her appearance. As for whether it was twins or mother and daughter, Guhan did not care. How could a man be tied down by such a small matter? Let King Yu and Juzi argue. Guhan was not stupid enough to interfere. Next was King Yu's level. The new King Yu was not a spirit sword, celestial sword, or emperor sword like Guhan expected, but a famed sword. Moreover, King Yu's sword mark had already appeared in Guhan's mind palace and was very friendly with Juzi's sword mark. Otherwise, Gahan would not have been able to release King Yu. King Yu and Juzi's sword marks were like a pair of mandarin ducks in Gohan's mind palace. They were very close, unlike Heaven Reliance and Doyu's sword marks. If their sword hilts weren't fused together, these two sword marks would have fought to the point where the world would have been turned upside down. King Yu and Juzi's relationship was like a model for twin sword ladies. In reality, this was similar to the sword marks of twin swords. They were all the same, and the sword marks were very friendly. However, one person could not wield two swords. They had to be identical twin swords to synchronize and coordinate them. Yuan-Tu and Avicii's strange twin swords actually had to kill each other to become Emperor's swords. The most important reason Gahan confirmed that the new King Yu was a famed sword was that Guhan found that the sword essence in his body had reached around 46,000, which was 10,000 quarks more than before. Other than synchronizing and coordinating the new King Yu, Gahan could not find a second reason to explain the 10,000 quarks of sword essence that suddenly appeared. However, Gahan could not understand. He had used so many precious materials on King Yu, so why was she still a famed sword lady? This didn't make sense. Gahan quickly threw this thought to the back of his head. Famed sword rank was good too. This way, he did not have to wait for him to become a sword wielder of immortal sword rank or emperor sword rank. Yu Wang could truly appear by his side now, and that was enough. Thinking about this, King Yu finally woke up. As soon as she woke up, she discovered that she was completely naked. Her face immediately turned red, and with a flash of light, a new set of clothes appeared on her body. This was the Sword Maiden's basic ability. She could transform into a set of clothes. However, the appearance of the clothes she transformed into was fixed, as if it was fixed in her life and could not be changed at all. There was a scientific name for it among the sword ladies. It was called the Sword Lady's Original Attire, which meant the Sword Lady's original attire. Qingpin's original attire was a jade green dress, while Doyu was wearing a light red princess dress. Etian was wearing a blue chivalrous female attire. Juzi was wearing a black water-sleeve dress, while Yuang was wearing a gray short skirt and leather armor. Wait, why did Yuang's attire change? Were these clothes? Yuang also realized that something was wrong with her attire. She pulled at the sleeves that looked like a skirt and looked at Gahan in confusion. How did this king's clothes become like this? All right, she had just returned to reality, and Yuang had actually changed back the way she had called him in a long time. If you had a mirror, you would realize that things aren't so simple, Gahan said to herself. Then, she took out a mirror and handed it to Yuang. Here, see for yourself. He had thought that Yuang would explode in anger, just like the previous 2 times. For the sake of the ancient sword rank and the immortal sword rank, she had hesitated. Gahan had to persuade Yuang to accept the truth. Therefore, Guhan was prepared to waste a lot of saliva to convince King Yu to accept the fact that he had undergone plastic surgery. However, he was surprised to find that King Yu did not show any displeasure. Instead, he looked relieved, as if this was exactly what King Yu wanted. That's great. Finally, I don't have to wear that face that I don't like. Yu Wang leaned into Gahan's embrace and said in a daze, after knowing that I'm not fated with the original body, I kept thinking that I shouldn't wear my original appearance. From that day on, Yu King Go Jianjian had nothing to do with me. I don't want to have anything to do with the original body. Oh no, Yu King Go Jianjian. At least in this world, no one will know that I had anything to do with Yu King Go Jianjian. It's great to be able to change my appearance. This way, I don't have to worry about others discovering my original identity. Yu Wang said what she was thinking. So she wanted to completely break away from Yu King Go Jianjian. So, she didn't even want her original appearance. Actually, thinking about it, this was normal. No one wanted others to know their previous identity after becoming independent. Furthermore, Yu Wang was just a fragment of Yu King Go Jianjian's consciousness. If others knew this, how would they view Yu Wang? Would they think that she was just an accessory to Yu King Go Jianjian? This would be a devastating blow to Yu Wang's dignity. Then don't you think it's bad that you look exactly like Juzi? Gohan asked. No. Yu Wang shook her head. These few days, I stayed in Juzi's body and went crazy and noisy. Juzi didn't say a single word and was very tolerant and protective of me. I was able to revive because of Juzi. Without Juzi, I couldn't even leave the game. Why would I mind that I look exactly like Juzi? On the contrary, this is my fortune. In the future, Juzi and I will be twin sisters. Yu Wang smiled brightly. The development of the matter was smooth and harmonious beyond Guhan's expectations. Yu Wang actually didn't have a trace of displeasure. This was great. If that's the case, then you better change your name. Guhan touched Yu Wang's face. Even though he was touching Yu Wang's face, it felt like he was teasing Juzi. And this king also feels that this king needs to change his name. At this point, Yu Wang suddenly became excited. It was as if he had been looking forward to changing his name for a long time. He also called himself this king. Think of one yourself. Guhan nodded. You can think of a unique name for yourself. That way, you can be completely independent and become a new self. I'll think of one myself. Yu Wang trembled with excitement. This was the process of representing his new life. How about I call myself Yuwa? No, this is still connected to Yu Wang. This name won't do. Before Guhan could say anything, Yu Wang rejected this name. Then call me Wu Wang. Yu Wang suddenly said. What did she mean? She wanted to kill Yu Wang? No, there's already Wu Wang Fuchai sword. Guhan rejected it for her. Then call it Frost King sword. Yu Wang's eyes flashed with tenderness. Frost King was the combination of Guhan and Yu Wang's names. Yu Wang's thoughts could be guessed without thinking. Frost King sword also exists. It's a treasured sword maiden. Guhan mercilessly rejected it again. Then call it Spring and Autumn sword. Yu Wang wanted to use the era she lived in to name herself. Spring and Autumn sword. It's a famous sword maiden. Spring and Autumn King sword. Yu Wang decided to increase the number of words in the name to 4. No sword maiden would be able to meet this. Spring and Autumn King sword also exists. Oh, I remember it's Jie Zichui sword. Guhan once again mentioned Yu Wang's name. F***CK. Yu Wang's mind was about to collapse. What was this? Who was that Jie Zichui? How could they meet this? Everyone must have experienced this before. Once they were in a state of mental breakdown, no matter how simple the matter was, they wouldn't be able to think of a solution. Instead, the more they thought, the more confused they became, as if they were about to explode. Should we call a honey orange sword? Juzi, who was standing behind Yu Wang, said softly. Juzi and honey orange. It seemed like Juzi already saw Yu Wang as her own child. After all, honey orange and Juzi look like a pair of mother and daughter. What puzzle? This name sounds weird and mysterious. I don't want it. The king of Yu rejected Juzi's suggestion without even turning his head. And it didn't matter if he didn't reject it. Guhan would reject it for her. Then let's call it Qi Dian sword. Suddenly, another voice came from behind. Your Highness, you've completed a shocking rebirth. It's as if you've obtained a brand new life. You've arrived at a brand new starting point, and you've also had a new beginning. Qi Dian sword. Qi Dian sword. Yu Wang repeated this name a few times. The joy on his face became brighter and brighter. He clearly liked this name. Guhan, let me ask you, is there anyone with this name in the Sword Lady? Yu Wang immediately asked Guhan. No, Guhan replied plainly. However, his attention wasn't on Yu Wang, but behind him. All right, I've decided. From now on, there will no longer be a sword lady called Yu Wang. There will only be a brand new Qi Dian sword. Yu Wang stood up and announced. Qi Dian thought that after making such an important decision, Guhan's expression would definitely change. However, Qi Dian was displeased to find that Guhan's attention wasn't on him at all. Instead, he was looking behind him. What are you looking at? You should be looking at me. Qi Dian pouted. He turned around and was completely stunned. Qi Dian was in a daze because it saw Rina Takasaka. The woman who had stolen its body was standing behind it. She had a calm expression on her face, and there was no hint of guilt on her face. What made Qi Dian feel even worse was that she felt a throbbing feeling from Rina Takasaka. Not only did she feel this feeling from Rina Takasaka, she also felt it from Qing Pin, Doyui Tian, and Juzi. Chapter 777. It's you? Aren't you embarrassed to appear before this king? Qi Jian raged when it saw Reina Takasaka's face. If Gohan hadn't come up with the idea of forging a sword mistress, she would still be in the Juzi sword's body. Why should I be embarrassed? Reina Takasaka replied indifferently. There wasn't a trace of shame in her eyes as she looked at Qi Jian. You should be thanking me. If not for me, would you be able to have this famed sword's body? You're twisting words and forcing logic. Qi Jian was even more displeased. That's the body that Gohan prepared for me. What are you have to snatch what belongs to me? Is that so? What if I say that this body should have been mine in the first place? Reina Takasaka sneered. What do you mean by that? Wasn't this body prepared for me by Gohan? I participated in the entire process. This was clearly prepared for me by Gohan. What has it got to do with you? Don't spout nonsense here. Qi Jian still wanted to say something, but it felt someone patting its shoulder. Then, Gohan pulled Qi Jian behind him and signaled for it to keep quiet. Gohan, this woman is full of nonsense. You prepared this body for me in the first place. What do you mean by this is her body in the first place? Qi Jian grumbled unhappily. Perhaps she's right. This body might have been hers in the first place, and it's just a pawn being used by someone else. Gohan's expression turned even colder. The chill in his voice could almost freeze a person's skin. I'm right? I'm just a pitiful pawn of your Leonian family. I've been in your Leonian family scheme from the beginning. It seems like you've thought it through. Reina Takasaka sneered. Schemes are indeed schemes, but have you ever seen a scheme that ends up involving oneself in the scheme? Do you think that our Leonian family can't do it ourselves? Anyone in the Leonian family can do it. Why must we rely on an outsider like you? Because they want you to become my sword maiden. Gohan clenched his fists. Congratulations, you've achieved your goal. I can't even kill you now. You're already my sword maiden. What do you mean? Qi Jian looked at Gohan with a confused look. What do you mean? What do you mean by she's your sword maiden? You are my second famed sword maiden in real life, and she is my second ancient sword maiden. Gohan's words were filled with bitterness. After considering all the things that had happened, he finally understood the complicated calculations involved. This had been the Leonian family's scheme from the beginning. The Leonian family's original goal was to use Gohan to free Reina Takasaka from Yuanko's body. Then, she would be reborn as a sword maiden. This was something that Gohan had already figured out. Now, Gohan understood something else. The Zhongyan sword that had appeared at the perfect time was not the broken sword left behind by the sword-bearer in Yuzhong City after the invasion. Instead, it was the body that the Leonian family had prepared for Reina Takasaka. Even Zhao Hao had been part of the Leonian family's scheme. They had done something at the perfect time to cause Zhao Hao's research to fail, turning the Zhongyan sword into an empty shell. Then, they had leaked this information to Gohan, enticing Gohan to immediately go to Yuzhong City and open the furnace of heaven and earth to reconstruct King Yu's body. Then, Reina Takasaka would be able to obtain this new body. Otherwise, how could there be such a coincidence in the world? As soon as Gohan heard about the furnace of heaven and earth, he immediately heard about the Zhongyan sword. Then, he effortlessly obtained 12,000 cubic centimeters of sovereign blood. Everything had gone too smoothly. However, because Gohan had been worried about King Yu's revival, Gohan had purposely ignored these suspicious points, allowing Reina Takasaka to win in the end. However, just as Reina Takasaka had said, the sovereign bloodline and Zhong Dian's body, which were the two most important resources, had always belonged to the Lun Yin family. The Liunian family could have done this on their own. Why did they have to borrow Gohan's hands? However, Gohan understood this point. It was because the Liunian family wanted to keep Reina Takasaka by his side forever. The Liunian family definitely knew the important secret of his birth, so they had set their sights on his future. They had to plant someone of their own by Gohan's side. Planting someone else was not as reliable as planting a sword mistress. He did not know what method Reina Takasaka had used to establish a connection with Gahan as a sword mistress, leaving her sword mark in Gahan's mind. However, there was no doubt that Reina Takasaka had become Gahan's sword mistress. Unless Gahan cut off her hair or cut off her ancient sword mark with a determination to destroy Reina Takasaka and Shin Pin together, Reina Takasaka would forever stay by Gahan's side as a sword mistress. It would be impossible for them to break up. Let's have a good talk. Gahan walked to Reina Takasaka's side and looked at her face to face. Now that things have come to this, I don't want to change anything. I only hope that you can tell me what your true motive is. I don't want to have a ticking time bomb by my side. If the Lionian family wants something from me, then please tell me clearly what it is. I promise you that apart from my life and my sword mistress, I can give you anything you want. I only hope that your Lionian clan will put all your thoughts out in the open and stop scheming against me in the dark. Guhan's anger could be heard in his voice. If I say that I don't know either, will you believe me? Reina Takasaka suddenly lowered her head. Her tone turned from arrogant to sad. You say that you're a chess piece, but am I not a chess piece as well? Do you think that the Lionian family would be willing to share their secrets with a half-human, half-Yuan-Ko fellow like me? I can tell you everything I know, if you believe me. Reina Takasaka suddenly raised her head and looked at Gahan with hope in her eyes. I believe you, Gahan said without hesitation. His eyes were filled with sincerity. I know that this isn't what you want. You've been conflicted about the entire plan. I can tell from the question you asked me before you entered the heaven and earth furnace that this isn't the outcome you want. You don't want to become a human, a Yuan-Ko, or a sword mistress. In your heart, you still want to be the original you. The girl who is still called Reina Takasaka, even if her body and soul are enemies. The Reina Takasaka who has a father and a mother who loves you. These words seem to be very emotional, but Gahan said it in an absolutely calm tone, forming a strange sense of contradiction that made people unable to refuse. Even at the very last moment, when your soul is about to enter the Sword of Destiny, you're still hesitating. When the Sword of Destiny turned milky white, Qijian hesitated for a long time in the Sword of Destiny. I had to persuade her for more than 10 seconds before she left the Sword of Destiny. Similarly, your soul did not enter the Sword of Destiny during those 10 seconds. I think you're the same as Qijian. You're hesitating as well. You're wondering if you should snatch Qijian's chance at rebirth. Am I right? Gahan finally finished his series of words. I didn't think that the person who understands me the most is. Tears began to stream down Reina Takasaka's cheeks. This damn body. I can't even control my tears. Reina Takasaka mumbled to herself. After changing her body, her personality seemed to have changed quite a bit as well. Since you trust me, I'll tell you everything I know. Reina Takasaka took in a deep breath and began to tell a sad story. Fleeting Time was around the same age as Liunian Ling at the time. Both of them had just turned 18 and left the Fleeting Time family, eager to explore the world. Fleeting Time met a beautiful girl in his travels. She had curly hair and would do silly things from time to time. Fleeting Time was completely mesmerized by her. The origin of this girl was not ordinary. She was the granddaughter of Sword Emperor Yanjin, who was nearly 70 years old at that time. Moreover, she was also a powerful spirit sword master. In her hands were sword mothers, all of which were powerful sword mothers that could control the air and wind. For some unknown reason, Fleeting Time had never seen Fleeting Time release the sword mistress from her body. What happened next was just like those cliché soap operas. Fleeting Time and the girl finally fell in love with each other after many adventures. They confessed their feelings to each other and promised to spend the rest of their lives together. Fleeting Time, who had been poisoned by the charm poison, forced himself on the girl, and the situation had reached a point where it was impossible to salvage the situation. The girl had no choice but to tell Fleeting Time the truth. She was not Gu Jin Jindy's granddaughter, but a Yuan-Ko that was picked up by Gu Jin Jindy an hour later. When Gu Jin Jindy saw the baby Yuan-Ko, She had nothing on her other than a talisman with her name and date of birth. Only the heavens knew why Sword Emperor Ji Jin, who had never shown any mercy in killing Yuan Zhen, had decided to take in and raise this infant Yuan Zhen out of kindness. But that was the truth. Gu Jinji had used his absolute authority to seal Kumiko Weizhou's identity. Even the Yuan co-detection system in Beijing was altered, allowing the girl to live as a human until she met Fleeting Time. The girl's name was Kumiko Weizhou. Chapter 778. Just like all melodramatic love stories, Fleeting Musashi would not do anything to her after he had just taken her body. Moreover, the human society did not stop Yuan Ko from falling in love with humans. As long as Yuan Ko was willing to stand on the side of humans and never enter a human-based city again, the human society would not stop them from falling in love. Of course, Fleeting Musashi did not have the courage to report the matter to his family. Of course, Fleeting Time did not have the courage to report the matter to his family. Things took a turn for the worse when Kumiko Weizhou gave birth to Fleeting Time Rina, and things took a turn for the worse. At this time, perhaps everyone would guess that the Lunyan clan had found out about this. Or perhaps Yuan Ko had found out about the matter. Then, he used a stick to separate the lovebirds, and in the end, he forcefully separated the immortal couple. However, the one who broke up the immortal couple was none other than Kumiko Weizhou herself, because she had cheated on him. As for who Kumiko Weizhou had an affair with, it had always been Fleeting Musashi's greatest pain. Fleeting Wooden Fish was probably the only person in the entire Fleeting family who knew the truth. No matter how Fleeting Rina interrogated her father, Fleeting Musashi was unwilling to tell her who Kumiko had an affair with. How did she cheat on him? It was not that Fleeting Rina did not suspect that her father was cheating on her. The truth of the matter was not as simple as she thought. Perhaps her father had cheated on her, or perhaps the Fleeting family had killed her mother and pushed the blame onto her mother. With such thoughts in mind, Fleeting Rina's relationship with the Fleeting family deteriorated from the age of 5 to 15. She became an invisible figure in the Fleeting family. One day, a woman named Kumiko Weizhou appeared in front of Fleeting Time Rina. The two of them shared the same appearance, and Fleeting Time Rina could sense the deep connection between them through their bloodlines. Fleeting Time Rina was certain that the woman was her mother. After the mother and daughter met, Kumiko Weizhou taught Fleeting Rina many things. It was also during this time that Fleeting Rina learned her ability to control the air. Fleeting Rina finally asked the question that had been bothering her for a long time. What was the truth? Did my mother really cheat on me? To Fleeting Rina's surprise, Kumiko Weizhou admitted to the matter. However, she did not reveal who she cheated on. She only told Fleeting Rina that she was the one in the wrong, and that Fleeting Musashi had nothing to do with it. She also hoped that Fleeting Rina would not resent Fleeting Musashi or betray the Fleeting family. Apart from the Fleeting family, there was no other place in the world that could give Fleeting Rina a bright future. As for Liu Ling, she was Fleeting Musashi's second daughter and Fleeting Rina's younger sister. She was 2 years younger than Fleeting Rina, and it was said that the marriage was a political one. Fleeting Rina did not care about the details, and she even avoided Liu Ling on purpose. Liu Ling did not even know that Fleeting Rina was her sister, and they only met a few times. At that time, Fleeting Rina was with Yuan Ko's friends in the Fleeting family, and Liu Ling thought that Fleeting Rina was just a guest of the Fleeting family. After Kumiko Weizhou's words, Fleeting Rina's relationship with the Fleeting family improved. As a member of the Fleeting family, Fleeting Rina began to participate in the Fleeting family's affairs. She killed many Yuan Ko with her own hands, and she even trained in the Fleeting family's intelligence department for a period of time. Later on, Fleeting Rina received a quest, which required her to use green silk cutter to cut the poor sword and bring it back to the Fleeting family residence. Everyone knew the outcome of the quest, and Fleeting Rina entered a state of recuperation after that. She did not participate in any more quests until Liu Ling brought Gohan to the Fleeting family. Fleeting Wooden Fish summoned Fleeting Rina to his side and told her that the Fleeting family needed someone of the Fleeting family's bloodline to stand by Gohan's side. This person could not be Liu Ling, as Liu Ling needed to inherit the Fleeting family's bloodline. This person could only be Fleeting Rina. In return, the Fleeting family would free Fleeting Rina from her current state of being neither a human nor a Yuan Ko, allowing her to live an eternal life in this world. Just as Gohan had said, Fleeting Rina was hesitant. If she chose to become the Sword Maiden, she would have to say goodbye to her parents and her bloodline. That was why she had asked Gohan about Gohan's attitude towards Yuan Ko. As for why she had asked for Gohan's opinion, it was up to him to decide. At the very least, Gohan did not know the answer to this question. I'm so touched. I'm so touched. Doyu had jumped out of the crowd, and he clapped his hands vigorously with tears in his eyes. He was deeply immersed in Fleeting Rina's story. So there's such a beautiful story behind this. Chi Dian, who had expressed its dissatisfaction towards Fleeting Rina, was also touched by Fleeting Rina's actions. Chi Dian's personality was on full display at this moment. After listening to Fleeting Rina's tragic story, Chi Dian had completely forgotten about the fact that his body was stolen from him. He gently hugged Fleeting Rina and patted her shoulder. You don't have to worry anymore. Although Gohan is not a good person, he is not a bad person either. As long as you're willing, you can join our family. No one will care about your past. Let the grudges from the past fade away with the wind. Shouldn't you be looking forward to the future? Chi Dian's words had wiped away all the grudges from the past. Sigh. Parents are the most unreliable people in the world. You clearly don't like parents like them, and yet you were born into their womb. This is the root of all human suffering. Etienne appeared out of nowhere and patted Fleeting Time Rina's head as he said something that sounded very poetic. Are you Qingpin's friend from now on? Poor Scholar appeared out of nowhere and rode on top of Fleeting Time Rina's neck. We're good friends from now on. Let me ask you a question. Do you like to eat meat? He asked while pinching Fleeting Time Rina's cheeks. Meat? I don't really like him. Fleeting Time Rina replied in confusion. Then it's decided. From now on, all of your meat belongs to Qingpin. Qingpin, will take care of you in this house. If Gohan doesn't like you, I'll pee into Gohan's mouth when he's asleep. Qingpin patted his chest as a guarantee. Gohan shuddered when he heard Qingpin's words. Did he really do that? Fleeting Rina's story had won over the sympathy of most of Gohan's sword ladies. Even Qingpin, who was almost separated from Gohan because of Fleeting Rina, seemed to have forgotten about the incident and began to get intimate with Fleeting Rina. The entire place was filled with laughter. The only ones who were not immersed in the laughter were Gohan and Juzi. The reason for Tangerine's inability to laugh was simple. Juzi would not be able to laugh with anyone. However, Gohan was not so simple, because Gohan was not so easily infected by a story. Gohan had been tricked twice by Fleeting Time Rina, and he would not fall for it a third time. Even if Fleeting Time Rina had become Gohan's sword mistress, there would always be a huge gap between her and Gohan. To put it bluntly, if a terrible situation were to occur, such as when Gohan had to choose between Juzi and King Yu, and if he had to give up one of his sword ladies, he would not have been able to do so. Juzi was the one he had to give up on, and Fleeting Rina was the sword lady now. This was something that could not be helped. The relationship between Fleeting Rina and Gohan was unimaginably complicated, and it was not surprising that something like this would happen. However, Gohan did not show it on the surface. When the other sword ladies welcomed Fleeting Rina into Gohan's family, Gohan smiled and patted Fleeting Rina's forehead. Miss Rina, I'll use this title to ask you one last time. Are you really willing to give up on everything and become my sword lady? Asked Gohan in a serious tone. Although you're my sword lady, I can promise you that you will not be with me. If you're not willing to be with me, you can do whatever you want within 200 kilometers of me. You can do whatever you want. I will not stop you. Deep down in his heart, Gohan hoped that fleeting moment Rina would leave him forever. Nobody would want to have a ticking time bomb by their side, as it was filled with uncertainty. The moment my soul entered the Sword of Destiny, I've made up my mind. The fleeting family no longer has anything to do with me. I will not return to the fleeting family. Fleeting Rina's words were equivalent to telling Gahan that she was willing to become Guhan's sword lady. I've given Shijin a name and put an end to my past with her. It's time for me to give myself a name and put an end to my past as well. I heard that before the Great Calamity, there was a very famous poem. It's called The Rolling, Flowing Waters of the East. Fleeting Rina paused for a moment. From now on, I'll be known as the Past Water Sword. Chapter 779. The rolling flow of time flows east. The waves wash away the tears of heroes. This was a very famous poem after the apocalypse. It was said to have been written by Li Bai, a famous poet from before the apocalypse. It was also because of this poem that people speculated that Li Bai had the ability to predict the future. Otherwise, how could this poem describe the story of the Fleeting Time family so clearly? Fleeting Rina had given herself a new name, Flowing Water. The meaning behind this was to tell Guhan and the others that she, Fleeting Rina, had nothing to do with the Fleeting family from now on. She was just Fleeting Flowing Water. Fleeting Rina had officially severed all ties with the Fleeting Time family. Gahan did not comment on this. He only asked Fleeting Rina, "If you're really willing to become my sword maiden, let me ask you this. What orders did the Fleeting Time family give you?" Orders? Shi Shui paused for a moment, then asked hesitantly, "Can I not say?" "No. If you really think of yourself as my sword maiden, then I hope that you can answer this question," Gahan said solemnly. "Grandfather gave me a total of 3 orders. Shi Shui sighed. The first order was that I must enter Zhong Dian's body and become the sword maiden. The second order was for me to monitor your every move, then compile into information and send it to the Fleeting Time family. Especially when you enter the Shanhai Pass, you must record everything in detail every day. You can't leave anything out." Shanhai Pass. Gahan was confused. Even if Shi Shui didn't mention the second order, Gahan could guess that the Fleeting Time family would send her to monitor him. However, Gahan did not understand why Fleeting Time Wooden Fish would want Shi Shui to pay special attention to the Shanhai Pass. Why did he want her to record everything he did after entering the Shanhai Pass? Gahan had no plans to enter the Shanhai Pass at all. Why was Fleeting Time Wooden Fish so certain that he would enter the Shanhai Pass? And why was he so concerned about the Shanhai Pass? Could it be that Fleeting Wooden Fish knew of his future? And in that case, Gahan was sure that many things that would affect his fate would happen in the Shanhai Pass in the future. What about the third order? Gahan looked at Shi Shui again and asked calmly, "What's the third order?" Shi Shui began to ponder again. Her answer was not as swift as the previous 2 questions. Clearly, this third command was the most crucial one. Naturally, Gahan would press her even harder. He must know what this command was. Yes. Finally, Shi Shui couldn't stand Gahan's coercion and answered intermittently, "Grandpa want me to give you a child." The last 2 words, "give birth to a child," were shouted out in an explosive tone. It was obvious that saying these words consumed a lot of Shi Shui's courage, and also completely stunned Gahan. What the hell is this? Why would Fleeting Time Wooden Fish want Shi Shui to bear him child? This was completely illogical, because it was impossible for a sword maiden to get pregnant. This was common knowledge that every human knew. Although the sword maiden could have sex with her sword wielder, it was only the movement of a piston between the 2 bodies. However, this was just the simple movement of the piston between the body structures. Using silicone to make an airplane cup and adding an automatic sprinkler system, it would be very harmonious. There was no difficulty at all. However, giving birth was different. At least, humans had yet to develop a man-made object that could replace a human female to give birth to a child, let alone an existence like a sword maiden. To put it bluntly, their bodies were evolved from the sword itself. Some scientists had studied the body of a sword maiden and discovered that although their body structure was the same as a human female's, sword maidens did not have blood, and there was no connection between their organs. They were more like a plaster fruit at home, only existing for the sake of existence, and could not play any real role at all. Since ancient times, the number of sword wielder who had sex with their own sword maidens had exceeded 300,000. Among these 300,000, there was not even a single child. This had been proven by facts. Now that Shi Shui had become a sword maiden, how could she give birth to a child for Gahan? This was simply an impossible proposition. I know what you're trying to say. Shi Shui blushed. I don't believe I can give birth to a child for you either, but Grandpa swore that you're different from other men, and that you're a thing that can definitely, but don't even think about it. Even if I die, I won't give birth to that thing for you. After saying that, Shi Shui ran away with a red face. Don't come to me for something as boring as giving birth to a child. Etienne looked at Gahan with disdain, then walked away leisurely. I won't give birth to a child for you either. Go find someone else. Sister Etienne, wait for me. Qijian also slipped away. But did her last words tell Gahan that he could have an affair as he pleased in the future? Big brother, if you don't mind those hateful and boring ethics, then I can. Before Douyu could finish, Guhan pulled on Douyu's hilt and put Douyu back into its scabbard. If he let Douyu continue, who knew what she would say that even Gahan wouldn't be able to accept? You're all useless things. Things like giving birth still depend on Qingpin. Qingpin sat in Guhan's nursery again and patted his belly generously. Stupid Gahan, as long as you promise to give Qingpin 200 pounds of meat every day, I'll lend my belly to you for a year. No, Qingpin saw on TV that a pregnancy only needs 10 months. Then I'll lend my belly to you for 10 months. You go back too. Guhan knocked on Qingpin's head. Then, Qingpin followed in Douyu's footsteps and ran back into the scabbard unwillingly. However, Guhan would never tell anyone that when Guhan heard Qing Qiu say that, he actually got hard. This was simply an unforgivable sin. It must have been a long time since he had sex with Qidian, so he couldn't suppress the fire of desire anymore. What about you? Is there anything you want to say? At that moment, only Juzi was left beside Gahan. Guhan asked Juzi with a pained expression. He could only hope that the usually calm sword mistress could calm down a little at a time like this. Juzi obeys master's orders. Juzi suddenly sat on the ground and spread her legs. Master, do you want to use Juzi now? If you want to have a child, I suggest master rest for 5 days. According to human calculations, after 5 days, Juzi will have the highest chance of getting pregnant. All right, you come back too. Gahan was speechless. He put Juzi back into the scabbard and left the furnace of heaven and earth that had completely changed his fate. Finally, Gahan temporarily put all the sword mistresses back into his scabbard and returned to Song Hama and Zhao Hao's side. What do you two plan to do? Do you want to follow me back to Beijing City? Or do you want me to send you back to Yuzhong City? Gahan asked. These two people had seen the entire process of the furnace of heaven and earth. At the very least, they had seen Guhan's 5 sword mistresses. This was equivalent to knowing Guhan's biggest secret. Gahan had to think carefully about how to deal with these two people. I'll go to Beijing City with you. Song Hama immediately raised his hand. Song Hama had long yearned to go to the legendary #1 human city. Now that there was a chance to go to Beijing City, Song Hama would not let go of this opportunity. That's good. It's good to go out and relax. Gahan nodded. There was no need to think about Song Hama's matter. Given his relationship with Song Hama, even if Gahan planned to destroy a human base city, Song Hama would not say anything. He would definitely be in cahoots with Gahan. Gahan did not even need to say a word. Song Hama would naturally help Gahan keep the secret. The real problem was Zhao Hao. If he was an ordinary person, it would be easy. Gahan would directly erase his memory and then give him a sum of money so that he could live the rest of his life safely and happily. He would not even have any psychological burden if he killed him with a single slash. If Zhao Hao was the sword bearer, it would be easy. Gahan would force Zhao Hao to swear on his sword mark that he would never tell Gahan's secret. Otherwise, the sword mark would be covered in dust, and the sword lady would never be able to free herself. Never underestimate the oath a sword-bearer made on his sword mark. This was not the kind of oath that an ordinary person could casually make. Once the sword-bearer broke the oath he made on his sword mark, the sword mark would be covered in dust. There was a high chance that he would never be able to free the sword lady. Therefore, once the sword-bearer swore on his sword mark, he would never betray his oath unless he had no other choice. However, although Zhao Hao's physical qualities were exactly the same as an ordinary person's, he was indeed a sword-forging grandmaster. Whether Zhao Hao's memory was erased or he was killed, Yuzhong City would lose an incomparably precious sword-forging grandmaster. This was something that the previous sword pavilion master of Yuzhong City could not accept. However, Zhao Hao's oath was not binding at all. It was no different from a fart. Therefore, when it came to dealing with Zhao Hao, Gahan was in a dilemma. The best solution Gahan could think of was to imprison Zhao Hao and keep him by his side. He could only use Yuzhong City and Yinjing City to test Zhao Hao. If Zhao Hao was willing to go to Yinjing City with him, it meant that Zhao Hao could accept being imprisoned by Gahan. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.